Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Bella had everything a girl of her age could dream of: expensive cars, lots of clothes, a luxurious house, and an unlimited bank account. Live and let live. But she was like a magnet attracting trouble. She would get into an accident and her expensive foreign car would have to be seriously repaired. Then she would party in a nightclub and the news would be full of stories about her adventures. "Bella, you can't do this. You're the only one I can count on. With my mom gone, I'm all alone. We used to do business together, but now the competition's taking over," said Mr. Anthony Wilson. "Dad, it's not my fault. You've been asked many times to sell the business, and you've persisted. Sell your car repair shops, put the money in the bank, and live on the interest," Bella objected. Tears glistened in the businessman's eyes. "It's easy for you to say sell the business. It's your future. I started my business from scratch with these hands. I repaired cars at night. My hands were covered in fuel oil." Bella shrugged. "Well, I don't understand you. I'm not a car mechanic, I'm a designer. I have my own vision." "What about your vision? It's easy to reason when I'm providing you with money. You should try it with your own mind and hands." Anthony exclaimed, his cheeks flushed. "I'll try it. They'd take me to any agency. Even now." Anthony shook his head. "What do they teach them in these universities? Not a single sensible thought. But they have enough arrogance and self-confidence for 10 people. You need a husband, otherwise you'll get out of hand. At your age, you should be thinking about children. And you're still clubbing. You're a disgrace to your father." Bella looked at him in surprise. "Why are you talking about children all of a sudden? I don't want to get married at all." "Well, maybe later, but certainly not now," she replied with a smile. Anthony was silent for a moment and went to his office. His mood was depressed. The news from the clinic where he had been examined was very disappointing. Dialing the doctor's number, he coughed, trying to bring his voice back to its former confidence. But it was impossible to do so. Was it really that bad? Mr. Anthony Wilson gloomed. The mood had gone completely sour. He's only 53. What now? What do we do now? How do you live when you don't know how long you have left? How to plan business deals, negotiate with partners? The longer he thought about his situation, the bleaker the future looked. And there was so much he wanted to do, so much he wanted to accomplish. And now what? His daughter grew up a rich, spoiled girl who only knows how to spend money left and right. There is no clever deputy to everyone is just waiting to snatch a tidbit from his business. Competitors have long had their eyes on the case of Wilson's and offered Anthony to leave, to give way to the young. But he did not consider himself old and was sure that he could rule the empire for a long time. And now, having learnt the diagnosis, his hands were down. He was trapped. Of course, Anthony could not blame his daughter. She behaved like most daughters of rich parents. Bella had hardly realized how hard her father had worked to build up his capital. She was born when he was already more or less on his feet and earned his first million. Remembering this, the businessman could not hold back his tears. Opening the family album, he began to look through the photos, which depicted his entire life. Here he is, a school graduate, giving flowers to a teacher. In the army under the supervision of a sergeant on the tourniquet and bars. Already demobile with a mustache and a gambling gleam in his eyes. And here he is taking his wife and daughter from the maternity hospital, eyes shining with happiness, a smile on his lips. Anthony realized that no money could replace such pleasant moments. A knock at the door brought him out of his reverie. "Yes, come in," he said out of habit, knowing that he and Bella were the only ones home. His daughter came in like a fairy and sat down opposite him. "Dad, you won't even give me money for a new car?" "I scratched the old one and hit the door. I parked it wrong, and that taxi driver. Well, I paid him for the damage, of course, but with a car, you need a new one." Mr. Anthony Wilson turned pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His lips trembled treacherously. Paula has a huge SUV with 7 seats. I want one of those, Bella said. An SUV, you say? Said her father icily. No, my daughter, you won't have an SUV, or a new car to replace a scratched one, or even a second-hand foreign car. The most you'll ride is a scooter or a bicycle. Enough. I've had enough. From today, I'm blocking your card and closing all your accounts. You become a regular city dweller, living from paycheck to paycheck and not spending millions to buy a new toy. Bella's face froze with surprise. How do you block a card? But I was planning to open my own design agency, to provide services, to build up a client base. You're the one who told me to work. Build up a client base, Mr. Wilson grinned. You know how you build it up? You sit in restaurants all day long, leave a fortune, and feed a bunch of lackeys who only appreciate you for your money. You probably don't know this, but I'm very ill, Bella. And I don't have long to live. I've thought it over, and I've realized that I can't go on like this, he said sadly. What have you decided? Bella asked cautiously, still not believing what was happening. What did I decide? Since you have no money, no job, you can look for a fiancé in a rubbish dump. I'm disinheriting you. I'm cutting you out of the will as a beneficiary today. I'm naming several public orphanages in your place. That was the first time her father had ever spoken to her like that. The most he'd ever been able to do before was wag his finger, then wave his hand and give her the money she needed. But now, in front of Bella sat a completely different man, stopped, pale, with frozen fatigue in his eyes. It was only now that she really looked at her father. Before, he had been to her something like a banker who gave out interest-free loans at any time. She sat silently and looked at him with eyes full of tears. She had never been so bitter before. It wasn't about money. It was about the fact that Daddy was sick, and she didn't even know it, thinking only about buying a new car. Daddy, you didn't go too far with the groom, did you? Well, the map, okay, I get it. The car, I was out of line. But a groom from a junkyard. You want to see your daughter next to a bum? Bella couldn't help herself. Mr. Wilson looked at her with a look that made her uncomfortable. Mr. Anthony Wilson turned pale and said coldly, Yes, I really want you to know the real life, not the one where you lived in a golden cage, unaware that the city dump has a life of its own too. Of course, I'm not forcing you to live in a shack and eat scraps, but until you understand how the underprivileged live, you won't understand my words. I've said it all. I won't keep you any longer. Her father's words made an indelible impression on Bella. Before this phrase in her soul still flickered hope that Daddy will come to his senses. But after his last words, she realized there was no turning back. Now she would have to take care of herself, find a job, and get acquainted with the life of the dump, which seemed to her something ephemeral and fantastic. Tears glistened in Bella's eyes, but Mr. Wilson remained adamant. He knew that his daughter was not worried about his illness and possible imminent death, but only about the fact that she would be left without a new car. As she left the office, Bella slammed the door one last time, trying to express her displeasure. Mr. Wilson only grinned and reached for the phone, dialing the number of the head of security. The businessman was giving detailed orders on how to proceed. Mr. William listened in silence. He had worked at Wilson's company for years and knew that if the boss gave him a task, it had to be done. When Mr. Wilson had told him to look after his daughter, the security chief had been almost devastated to hear that Bella was going to be in the city dump. City dump? Why send your own daughter there? Mr. William was genuinely perplexed, but he couldn't discuss orders, only carry them out on time. After all, the rich have their quirks, he decided. There was no telling what a 50-year-old businessman with everything the average man could dream of might think of. Mr. William was in his early 30s and had worked as a serious crime operative in the recent past. No one knew why the young policeman had quit and gone into private security. There were rumors of a bribe, a conflict with his superiors. In fact, everything was simpler. Once during the arrest of a dangerous criminal, William exceeded his authority, hitting him. The detainee turned out to be a man of influence and had solid connections in the power structures. Soon complaints were pouring and asking William to be dismissed from the police force for dishonoring the honest name of the guardian of the law. The most offensive was that the scoundrel was soon released. It was rumored that the detainee's father had hired a good lawyer who had found a loophole in the law and dragged the offender like a camel through the eye of a needle. William then became very upset and frustrated with the system. After a while, he regretted his dismissal. Just 6 months later, the rich man's son was back in the dock for another offense. Do police officers sit idly by, failing to ensure the safety of citizens? Unfortunately, William could not return to the service. Either he liked the free life, or he did not accept the fact that the guilty can get away with it. Mr. Wilson's work was not bad. William bought a 2-room flat in the center, and even a second-hand car of domestic production, because he could not stand foreign cars. He had gained weight and had a small belly, which, however, he managed to hide under a loose shirt. On the one hand, he liked Mr. Wilson's job, but it came with certain obligations. For example, William couldn't tell anyone about the job except his closest relatives, and there was no one close to William, who had grown up in an orphanage. He was unmarried and had no one to share it with. During his years in the police, he had learned to keep his mouth shut. Having received a new assignment, the head of security immediately began to realize it. Everything seemed to go smoothly. However, there was one circumstance that greatly embarrassed William. About a month ago, Mr. Wilson's rival, Mr. Ben Pattison, had approached him. At first, William didn't even realize what they wanted from him. Was he a scout to be recruited? But Pattison knew who he was dealing with. Mr. Ben Pattison got straight to the point. "Look, William, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'll get to the point. I need you to give me a full report once a month on Mr. Wilson's activities, his contacts, his meetings." "What? Where? When?" "Basically, you know what I mean. You're not stupid. And in return, I'll give you something interesting." "No, not money. I think you have enough of it." William looked with surprise at the businessman's unpleasant, slightly puffy face. It was the first time he had ever had such a sensitive conversation. "What do you want to offer me?" ironically asked the former policeman. Pattison grinned. "What would you like? I'll offer you the truth. You grew up in an orphanage, didn't you? If you behave yourself, I'll tell you the secret of your past. If you want, I can even give you parents you'll never find." "How interesting." William turned pale and reached for his tie to loosen the knot. Sweat was pouring down his face. He'd wanted to know the secret of his birth since he'd fought for every piece of bread in the orphanage. "But what guarantee is there that you will tell me the truth and not deceive me?" "A little bolder?" asked the head of the guard. Pattison shook his head reproachfully. "Do you need any more guarantees? I think the guarantee is my word. We Pattisons always keep our promises, whether to a friend, a subordinate, or a vagrant. So you can trust me when your information is complete. I will tell you the secret of your birth." William thought for a moment. Of course, it looked tempting, but it smelled of betrayal. If Wilson found out, he'd be in trouble. And it was against his principles to do anything dishonorable. Not knowing what to do, he decided to pause and answered Pattison evasively. "I must think it over. If I agree, I'll come to you myself. And if I don't, consider that this meeting never happened." The businessman nodded in agreement, hiding a smile. In fact, he did not know William's parents and frankly deceived. They hadn't seen each other again since then, but not a day went by that the ex-cop didn't berate himself for turning down a risky deal. "All right, we'll see what happens," he thought. "I'll keep an eye on Bella for now and see what happens," the security chief reassured himself. Naturally, Bella did not know all this and thought she was all alone. Of course, she was not starving and could live a normal life. But what kind of life would it be when there would be no restaurants, nightclubs, and fashionable parties with stupid friends who only do what they do to discuss new guys? She didn't consider herself stupid. After all, she graduated from university with honors and was considered one of the most promising graduates. But it was not because her father was an influential man. The point is that the girl always achieved everything herself, perhaps in this way wanted to self-realize, to prove to her father that not everything in the world is decided by money. But only knowledge is not enough, and the unlimited amount on the bank card great, especially if you own it. Trying to find a way out, Bella called her best friend Paula. They had known each other since high school when, as children of wealthy parents, they had flaunted expensive outfits to each other. At the school graduation, there was an embarrassment when the two femme fatales came to the party in identical dresses. Classmates began to tease them, calling them twins. In truth, Bella and Paula were very much alike. And to get rid of the resemblance, Paula even dyed her hair black, so as not to be light blonde like Bella. As she dialed her friend's number, Bella mentally thought out her speech so she wouldn't look pathetic. "Hi, are you busy?" Her friend stretched languidly, like a cat, and got up from the sofa. "No, I don't think so. Do you want to come to visit? Maybe you've already bought a new car and want to outdo me? Just so you know, mine was customized. There's not another one like it in the world." "Well, maybe not in the world, but in the city and the country." Bella sighed convulsively, realizing that now she not only didn't have a brand new car, but even an old one with scratches on the door and fender. Bella realized that she had made a mistake. Of course, she shouldn't have talked about it at every turn. Deciding to turn the conversation to another topic, Bella began asking Paula about the virtues of her new car. She knew that Paula would jump at the opportunity to tell her how rich her father was. Bella had to listen for several minutes about how comfortable the SUV was and how little petrol it consumed on the motorway. And also in its interior you could take great selfies, which later went viral on social networks. After waiting for Paula to calm down, Bella politely said goodbye and hung up the phone with relief. Only now did she realize that all this time she had been living exactly the same meaningless, devoid of spice life. Perhaps her father was right about something. How had she, a talented designer, turned into a rich doll who was only interested in things, money, expensive cars? Most girls her age have other things on their minds. Some have already given birth, and someone, on the contrary, only comprehends the joys of the first relationship, when the period of candy bouquet seems something beautiful and unearthly. Of course, Bella was afraid to go to the dump alone. What could happen to her there? All these vagrants are unpredictable people, and not everyone can understand their motivation. Imagining herself next to a homeless man, Bella shuddered. "Yeah, my dad's a funny guy. I'd have to think of something like that. Would he have introduced me to a prisoner or something?" Rustic, she thought, looking around her wardrobe for something suitable for a trip to the rubbish dump. Bella decided to go there in the morning, because in the evening, in such a dangerous place, she could expect a lot of trouble behind the mountains of rubbish. But during the day, things were kind of different. A huge pile of rubbish in the light of the sun's rays would hardly seem to be anything scary, and the ubiquitous rats with their bald tails would not be so bold and would hide at the first appearance of guests. Bella had no idea that she had been closely watched by Mr. William, for whom it was not unusual for him to watch her. In his days as a police officer, he had often had the opportunity to follow suspects. But this time it was not a criminal, but the boss's daughter, who had decided to learn the secrets of the homeless vagrant life in case of any emergencies. Mr. William always had with him a powerful stun gun that could ward off both a vagrant and a hungry dog. The only problem for the former policeman was that it would be very difficult to keep watch in a junkyard. But he couldn't, in his expensive suit, lie down on a mountain of rubbish with binoculars in his hands and start watching. Of course, he could then take the clothes to the dry cleaners, but how would he show up there with the scent of landfill and household waste? Mr. William decided to take a change of clothes with him so that he could leave his dirty clothes at the dump after the surveillance was over. Bella, on the other hand, was thinking hard about what to do next. It was easy to say, "I, Bella Wilson, am looking for a fiancé," but when she thought of it in her mind, she felt uneasy. She couldn't go up to the first man she met, shake his dirty, unwashed hand, and offer to be her friend and later her fiancé. It's disgusting to even think about. Although, on the other hand, given how much she missed her father's bank card, Bella realized that the sooner she complied with his request, the sooner she would regain her financial independence. After giving it some thought, she decided to do the following. Before going to the dump, she went to a shop with freshly baked goods and bought several dozen pies with different fillings, then a dozen flavored buns, and a few cartons of juice. She didn't even think about buying alcohol for the homeless. It wasn't a good idea to start an acquaintance by drinking alcohol, especially since she herself couldn't stand strong alcohol. The most she could afford was a light cocktail in hot, sultry weather. With 2 bags full of provisions in her hands, Bella went to the city dump with a sad expression on her face. At first, she wanted to call a taxi, but then she gave up, for many of the carriers knew her by sight, and could tell someone they knew that they had seen Bella Wilson at the dump. Before going to such an unpleasant place, Bella had deliberately washed off all her makeup and put on black glasses. She had even tried to change her hair so that she wouldn't be recognized by anyone she knew. But then, After weighing up the pros and cons, Bella realized that she was unlikely to see anyone from her inner circle amidst the mountains of rubbish. After all, at this time most of her friends were peacefully asleep in their beds, resting after another night of partying. As Bella approached the dump, her excitement grew more intense. The heat was unbearable. A slight breeze carried the unpleasant odor of decaying waste to her. The closer she got, the sharper and more intense the odor became. For a moment, she even caught herself thinking that she couldn't overcome her innate squeamishness and wouldn't dare to set foot in the landfill. Let her father do whatever he wanted, even if he could strip her of her surname, her inheritance, and her bank accounts. Bella wasn't like that. She could never get over herself and her innate pride. As she approached the junkyard, a dark SUV with Mr. Williams sitting in it drove slowly behind her. The car was not a company car, for the head of security very rarely took it to work. It was all the fault of Mr. Anthony Wilson's caustic remarks, who called his car a bucket of bolts. The first people Bella saw were stray dogs. The odor from the bags made them wag their tails and whine, watching her with hungry eyes. She looked sadly at the skinny, sunken bellies, then took out some pies and began to feed them to the destitute animals. Of course, Bella realized that she couldn't feed them all, but she could give them hope, if only for a short time. And Bella had never done anything like this before, not with this kind of experience. She had thought of stray animals as something like rats, to be isolated and kept in special kennels. But now she looked at the situation with different eyes. The poor, destitute animals posed no danger to her. Some even approached her at arm's length, trying to lick her palm in gratitude. "Eat, eat. If it's all right, I'll bring some more tomorrow," Bella said, hardly able to contain her excitement. At that moment, she felt like an animal trainer who had managed to tame wild animals. Watching the scene from afar, Mr. William could not restrain a smile. What a major thought, Anthony, ironically. He's just as likely to volunteer. After Bella had fed the stray animals, she was in a better mood. Now the dump didn't seem like such a dangerous place, where everyone was just waiting to do harm. Bella was amazed that dogs, like their wild ancestors, the wolves, also lived in packs and obeyed the leader. Here it was a tall dog of advanced age, whose muzzle was already touched with silver. Looking into his eyes, Bella saw tears in them. She couldn't tell for sure whether the tears were due to gratitude for the food or just old age. When the dogs were behind her, she saw a winding path that led her deep into the dump. On either side of her were huge mountains of rubbish, like sand dunes that glistened every time a breeze touched cellophane bags or empty cans. A chill ran down her spine when Bella saw the first tramp ahead of her. It was an elderly man, moving from place to place and picking through the rubbish with a special dipstick, sorting the rubbish into glass and plastic. He was carefully placing his loot into pre-prepared flour or sugar sacks. Hearing footsteps behind him, the grandfather flinched, then turned round sharply. Most likely, the instinct of self-preservation kicked in. After all, the vagabond constantly lived in a sense of danger and could not relax for a moment. When he saw Bella, he instinctively tried to hide, despite the fact that the girl was dressed in the simplest clothes. But to the elderly tramp, she looked as supernatural as if she had just stepped off a modeling runway. "What are you doing here? Are you lost? I'll lead you out, because there are stray dogs running around hungry. They might attack you. They'll tear you to shreds. You're the one with the bags that look so conspicuous. You should have brought a flag," the tramp remarked with a touch of irony. Bella appreciated the elderly man's joke. "Well, I've already seen the dogs, and they didn't do anything bad to me. I fed them a little. Now I'm moving on." The old tramp thought for a moment. Frankly speaking, the thought that such a beautiful girl could come to the city dump and feed the dogs there did not fit in his head. "My name is Mr. Matthew, and for the more brazen ones, they call me Maddie," he said. "And I'm Bella. Bella Wilson. Maybe you've heard of me?" The girl answered readily. Mr. Matthew shook his head negatively. "No, I haven't heard. In fact, I'm rarely in town. I have a scrap of old building materials here, but one that the former owners threw away as waste. That's how I live. I don't really need the city. My daughter-in-law takes all my pension. Right after my son died, she and I had a quarrel. I left home. She won't even let me see my grandchildren. Well, why do they need a vagrant grandfather? He sighed, pale. "Oh, really, Mr. Matthew? It's not normal. Why are you giving her your pension? You're digging in the rubbish yourself. You're encouraging your daughter-in-law," Bella said, indignantly. The old tramp shook his head. "Oh, young one, it's too complicated to understand. I don't need money either. And the grandchildren will get something. The main thing is that the daughter-in-law did not let them on something bad. After my Kyle died, she can't find a good fiancé. She's going to extremes." Bella looked at the old man and could not believe her ears. Was all this really happening to her? She used to think of the homeless as the dregs of society, lost to everyone and of no use to anyone. That said, it wasn't to say that Bella was overly arrogant. Just being a person without financial problems, she didn't realize that some people have to fight for their place in the sun. And no matter where exactly this fight takes place in the field of business or on the territory of the city dump, everyone wants to snatch a piece of happiness. However, this happiness is different for everyone and often depends on the thickness of the purse and position in society. For a tramp in the morning, a stale bun and a glass of tea will be a great treasure. But for Bella, even the purchase of expensive cars did not delight her for more than an hour, and then everything became ordinary and too bland, like a dish devoid of salt and spices. Remembering that she had food in her bag, Bella took out a couple of pies and handed them to Mr. Matthew, then added a carton of juice, the sight of which pleased Granddad very much. "Oh, thank you. I've only ever had orange juice in my dreams. Once, though, I found a half-empty carton. I was suffering from poisoning afterwards," he said with a smile. "So it was a pleasure. You know how it is." Smiling, Bella handed him the sweet bun. A sweet smile played on her lips. At that moment, she seemed to him a real fairy who had come to do good. A thought flashed through Mr. Matthew's mind. Now Bella will take out her magic wand and turn the mountains of rubbish into a fairy tale oasis inhabited by birds of paradise and animals living in harmony with each other. Well, of course that didn't happen. The city dump was a grim, if not creepy place. Some strays came and some strays went, and only the dump grew larger, consuming the living space like a beast of prey. Mr. Matthews sat down on an empty beer crate and began to eat, drinking juice with the tasty pies. He was glad to be alive and looked at his savior with a smile. At this moment, the elderly man was ready to literally idolize Bella, who in fact did nothing special. After all, for her to buy pies and a carton of juice for a homeless man was nothing. Yes, she spent such sums per evening that it would be enough to feed a whole horde of hungry vagrants along with stray dogs and even cats. "Tell me, where do you have other homeless people living here? You're not alone here, are you?" Bella asked quietly. "No, I'm not alone, but you have to go farther away. Just be careful," the older man squinted at her. "Okay? 'Cause there's all sorts of people amongst the tramps, and sometimes even ex-convicts, it seems. So always be on your guard. And if you need to shout, I'll hear you. I've got excellent hearing. I was a musical instrument tuner back in the day, so I can hear every rustle a mile away." "Thank you very much," thanked Bella. "I hope everything will be all right," Bella said with a smile and went on her way. Meanwhile, Mr. William, cursing the world, was making his way through the mountains of rubbish without Bella noticing him. Absorbed in his surveillance of the boss's daughter, without noticing it, the head of security became the object of observation of a certain trio. These vagabonds were feared by everyone in the neighborhood. Kevin, Tom Shurup, and Dan Red kept all the inhabitants of the dump in fear, taxing them. They did little or nothing themselves, living off the dividends they received from the vagrants they intimidated. 2 of them had served time in prison for crimes committed in the past. When they were released from prison, they realized that they were useless and had lost their homes. That's when this trio arrived at the city dump, where in fact there was a huge amount of money. However, they had to take them competently or simply take away, which was much easier and faster. "Look who's here." Tom pointed with a smile at Mr. William, who had climbed out of the rubbish heap. "It's a fine haul, I see. There's a lot of money to be made from one of these. Just make sure you get in from the back." "He's a tough bastard." "Yeah, he could put up a bit of a fight," Kevin agreed. Only Dan remained silent, afraid of attacking a man in broad daylight. He was the only one of the three who had no criminal record, so he feared possible criminal liability like fire. But since Dan himself was a man driven and insecure, he let his friends push him around as they pleased. In the meantime, Bella went further and further into the depths of the dump. Here and there she spotted rats peering out of empty boxes or piles of rubbish. They were watching her with their shiny black eyes, as if mocking the unfortunate guest who was here. Fortunately, the trio of junkyard thugs didn't see her, as they were absorbed in following Mr. William. Kevin, Tom, and Dan had shared the security chief's clothes beforehand, mentally picturing themselves in his jacket, trousers, and mirrored shoes. Unfortunately, Mr. William noticed the danger too late and only turned around when a shard of glass crunched under Kevin's foot. The experienced guard turned round sharply and reached into his pocket, where his stun gun should have been kept. But it wasn't there. Most likely he had dropped it somewhere when he was wading through the mountains of rubbish to choose a convenient angle for surveillance. "What's it going to be, Bo? Are you going to give it to us? Or should we slap you around a little more?" Tom Smith was the first to break the long pause. "Look here, lads, why don't you get the hell out of here?" said Mr. William, trying to buy time. "I can work out for myself what I should and shouldn't do," replied Mr. William. At first he mistakenly thought that this phrase would be enough to make the tramps scatter and stop trying to rob him. But in this particular case he had been miscalculated, for Kevin and Tom came at the stranger like rats, in a hurry to deny him the chance to fight them off alone. It was at this point that William realized he was in a bad way. He had nothing to defend himself but his own fists. Of course, the outraged bandits also had a hard time. After all, William knew how to fight, and in fact regularly used his knowledge in practice. But the longer the fight lasted, the more the raiders lost confidence, realizing that for them it was not a fight for life, but for death. Realizing that he could not defeat 3 bandits at once, William began desperately calling for help. The former policeman did not know why he was doing this. It was unlikely that any of the inhabitants of the junkyard would help him, especially since he had come here uninvited and clearly did not fit in with the scenery around him. The first to hear the call for help was Mr. Matthew, who put aside his pie and immediately rushed to the rescue. In turn, the rats, who were everywhere present, immediately snatched up a piece of the bun, which they gnawed at with their sharp yellow teeth. Hearing the screams, Bella, with bags in her hands, went to the source of the sound. At that moment, the girl heard footsteps behind her. Turning round, she saw a young man of about 30 with broad shoulders and kind blue eyes approaching her with a quick step. Smiling, he walked past and hurried towards the scene of the fight. When Mr. Matthew got involved, the trio of tramps bounced away fearfully. A knife glinted in Valerka's hand and he stabbed William, who was sprawled on a pile of rubbish. "Come on, let's get out of here alive before I call the police," shouted the elderly man, realizing how pathetic his threats looked. Fortunately, at that moment the stranger whom Bella had met on the path came to the scene of the fight. He was the one who frightened the 3 hapless robbers the most. They exchanged anxious glances and hurried away. Mr. Matthew looked at his savior and smiled. "Thank you, James. If it hadn't been for you, those things would have mauled him. They stabbed him with a knife. I don't want anything bad to happen. I think we should call an ambulance." The old tramp called James and shook his head. "No, Mr. Matthew, we've got to get him out of the dump first because no ambulance crew can get here. Unless there's a helicopter. But I don't think anyone's going to send a doctor down here in a helicopter. I don't see any other way out. Come on, let's get him up and get him to the exit." Bella appeared at that moment, still holding the bag from the supermarket. James smiled and immediately asked her to help. Bella hesitated for a moment, then set the bags down on the mountain of rubbish and got involved. James acted as the main force as he was the strongest and tallest. Bella was only helping Mr. Matthew, unable to match the boy's strength. Looking closer, Bella suddenly spotted Mr. William. She immediately recognized the head of security and shuddered. God, what was he doing here? Did my father send him to spy on me? But Daddy, you're so funny, she thought. But she didn't say it out loud. Mr. William had noticed Bella too, though he pretended not to know her. Why shock the tramps, who would not understand the motives of a rich girl who came to the dump at her father's request? Despite his serious injury, Mr. William was still conscious and even tried to help his rescuers by moving his legs, to which James immediately said, "Look, mate, you might want to save your strength, all right? You're going to bleed to death. We've got a long way to go, so you better relax and let yourself be saved." Mr. William smiled. "Thanks, mate. I didn't even expect that such nice people could live in a junkyard." James shook his head, then looked over to Mr. Matthew. Little did he know that they had been friends for a long time and supported each other in all their endeavors. The good-natured old man considered James his grandson, or at least his nephew. As you know, the junkyard was a place where it was hard to rely on anyone, as everyone thought only of themselves and their own benefit. When James, Mr. Matthew, and Bella finally reached the exit, their hope had literally run out and their souls were already desperate to leave the junkyard. Mr. William was already unconscious from loss of blood and could not speak, but only mumbled something incoherent. Bella called an ambulance, as neither Mr. Matthew nor James had a phone with them. James knelt by the exit and tried to put his hand over Mr. William's wound to stop it bleeding. Thankfully, the doctors didn't have to wait long. The dispatcher coordinated the medics correctly, and the resuscitation team arrived on time. At first, the doctors thought there had been a stabbing between James and Mr. William and eyed the tramp warily. But when Bella, who was more or less trustworthy, told them what had happened, the doctors breathed a sigh of relief and got to work. That's when the girl said that she knew the victim and was ready to accompany him to the clinic. Mr. Matthew refused to go, but James decided to follow Bella's example. The thing was that the doctor of the intensive care team immediately warned that a donor would be needed for blood transfusion. James was young and energetic, and he was the best person for the job. Bella was dizzy from the abundance of information and experience. Yesterday she was living the life of a rich lady, and today, together with a vagrant, she was rescuing her wounded chief of security. When she arrived at the hospital, she decided to report the incident to her father, Mr. Anthony Wilson, just so he would know where his most loyal and valuable employee had disappeared to. James, on the other hand, was being prepared for a blood transfusion, as Mr. Williams' condition remained steadily grave. But just before the manipulation, James' blood was taken to rule out the presence of any diseases or mismatches. Realizing that they had done all they could, Bella thanked James for his help and left the clinic, staggering from side to side from exhaustion. This was too much for her after all. What she needed more than anything right now was a soft bed to rest and recover. But Mr. Anthony Wilson was literally out of his depth with worry. What was he thinking when he sent his daughter to such a dangerous place? Of course, it was possible to understand the businessman in some way. After all, he hoped for Mr. William, who always followed orders, no matter what. But this time he himself had become a victim, and now needed help no less than his captors. On hearing what had happened, Mr. Wilson immediately phoned the head of the department and promised to help in any way he could to get Mr. William rescued. "Look, if he survives, I will pay all the expenses and even make the clinic the latest repairs, buy modern equipment. Anything you want to do, just save him, you hear me? I owe him," exclaimed the businessman in despair. The doctor patiently listened to Mr. Wilson, and then said that everything was in God's hands now, and no money could change the situation. Mr. Wilson sadly hung up the phone. At that moment, he realized what a mistake he had made. Having decided to teach his daughter a lesson, when he saw a pale and exhausted Bella on the doorstep of his house, the businessman rushed to embrace her and ask for forgiveness. "Come on, Dad, it's okay, I understand. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to take a shower. I feel like a rat from the junkyard," smiled Bella. Mr. Wilson nodded understandingly. The businessman's heart was ready to leap out of his chest with worry for his head of security. All he could do now was pray that Mr. William would survive and not fall victim to the trio of thugs who had been working the city's rubbish dump. Thanks to Mr. Wilson's assistance, Cav, Tom and Dan Red were arrested and taken into custody. They did not conceal their participation in the attack and therefore immediately confessed. But the most interesting thing was ahead for Mr. Wilson, when none other than Mr. Ben Pattison timidly entered the room of the operated Mr. William. Upon seeing his rival, Mr. Wilson turned pale and involuntarily reached into his pocket where he carried his phone. Mr. Pattison shook his head negatively. "Stop it, Anthony. I'm not going to argue or confront you. What we have in common right now is a common problem. We both want William to get well, don't we?" Mr. Wilson raised an eyebrow in surprise. William? Mr. Pattison coughed embarrassedly. Yes, you're not wrong. That's exactly right. William, he's my son. Do you understand? I found out quite by accident, here just today, when I had an affair with his mother many years ago. A little fling, nothing serious. Then we broke up and went our separate ways like ships at sea. Only Caroline was pregnant by then. It was a difficult birth. Caroline had twins. The doctor had no choice. What to do? Caesarean section. Natasha didn't survive, and the babies ended up in an orphanage. Mr. Anthony Wilson looked at his rival with surprise. That's an interesting story you're telling me, Ben. What is it? Your son works in my company. Ben Pattison nodded in agreement, realizing that it sounded very strange. To the surprise of the former competitors, the weirdness didn't end there. Soon the doctor came into the room and announced another shocking news. The thing was that when they took James's blood for analysis, when compared, it turned out to be exactly the same rare group as Mr. Williams. I'm no expert, of course. The DNA test will decide. But it seems to me that these young men are close relatives, perhaps even brothers, the doctor concluded. Here it was Ben Pattison's turn to be surprised. All this time he thought that one of his babies was adopted and William went to an orphanage. But according to the doctor, everything happened quite differently, and tears flowed from the eyes of the businessman. At that moment, he no longer wanted to share anything with his competitor, and also to see an enemy in Mr. Wilson. After all, without realizing it, he had found two sons whom he had not been able to find for years. In a burst of emotion, Ben Pattison knelt down in front of William's bed and wept softly. Mr. Wilson tactfully stepped out and asked the nurse not to disturb them for a few minutes. Fortunately, William recovered. The doctors did everything they could to make him better. This was partly helped by the blood transfusion, which was just right for the patient. James at first did not believe that his father is none other than Ben Pattison, whom everyone in town believes to be a multi-millionaire, able to rain money on the city. But when Ben Pattison presented him with all the evidence, the boy realized that his life had taken a sharp turn. All to blame was a fire in the orphanage, when the little brothers William and James were dispersed to different educational institutions in a terrible turmoil. Personal files were mixed up, which for many years deprived the brothers of the opportunity to see each other. And only thanks to Ben Pattison, who showed great will and was able to untangle this tangle, the brothers were able to meet. Learning that William was on the mend, Mr. Wilson suddenly realized that he, too, should fight for his own health, just like this young man who had rushed to fulfill his orders and risked his own life. The businessman realized the value of life, and that one must fight for it until his last breath. Bella and James, after the incident, did not stop communicating. They continued their acquaintance, but now in a more cozy place. Mr. Ben Pattison did not interfere with his son's choice. After all, he considered Bella an excellent match to unite the two businesses. Mr. Williams stayed in hospital for about 3 weeks, and when he was finally discharged, he could not help recognizing James as the tramp who had saved him at the city dump. Now he was a well-dressed young man with a gambling gleam in his eyes and a perfume that smelled like a dandy. Bella, in spite of all the shock, continued her acquaintance with the city dump, where she organized a temporary hot food and medical aid station for the destitute vagrants. She did not forget about the dogs, who also received everything they needed. Becoming the head of the volunteer center, Bella felt that she had found herself in life and would no longer treat money so frivolously and thoughtlessly. After all, instead of spending it on another trinket, she would rather help her neighbors, for whom this contribution could be crucial and decisive, thanks to Bella's help. Mr. Matthew was able to reconcile with his sister-in-law and rejoin the family. Now he no longer thinks about the landfill and 24 hours a day plays with his grandchildren, who drag him to the park to feed the swans on the pond. 6 months after meeting, James and Bella played a wedding, which was attended by acquaintances and friends from both sides. William was not left without his soulmate in William, who liked Mr. Matthew's sister-in-law Zoe. Naturally, all this would not have happened if Mr. Wilson at some point did not decide to put in place his daughter Bella, whom he loved with all his heart. But what came to pass was what came to pass. 3 months later, James and Bella were back at the wedding, not their own, but the wedding of William and Zoe, who had become their friends, family, and a model of an ideal couple, where harmony, Love and mutual understanding reigned. Winter was approaching fast this time. Yesterday it was still warm, and couples in love were wandering around parks and kissing. But it had taken 24 hours to make everyone wrap themselves in warm scarves up to their eyes and put away light sweaters. Now they had to dress not for beauty, but to stay warm. Even beggars, who were numerous in warm weather, now preferred to hide in glass pavilions with ATMs. From there, however, they were chased away. "Did you want to help yourself?" a man in his 50s asked sternly, coming in from the cold. He brought a cold draft with him, and the two vagrants who had dozed off immediately woke up. "There's nowhere to rest. They won't let us," grumbled the younger one. "Are we not human beings?" he shouted and headed for the door. The other one didn't even move. "And do you need a special invitation?" the man asked. The tramp smiled crookedly. "I guess I don't look like me at all, since you don't recognize me." He pulled off his hat and ruffled his hair. "Doesn't look like this." "Brian," the man whispered. "Is it really you? How did you get here? Why the bum?" "Bitter," Brian grinned. "Long story, Jeffrey, I'm too lazy to tell. And my throat's dry." He gave the man a sly glance. Maybe this ruse would work. And then, at least tonight, he'd be fed. It did. Jeffrey pulled a card out of his wallet. "I'll withdraw some now and then we'll go. We'll eat, have a drink. Tell me all about it." Half an hour later, Brian was sitting across from Jeffrey in some cheap cafe, eating his third shawarma. Of course, a tramp wouldn't be allowed in a decent place. One wouldn't dream of it. But who cares if it's warm and even has food?
"What happened to you?" Jeffrey asked. He hadn't gotten himself anything but coffee, but he hadn't touched it either.
Brian searched his eyes for a napkin and, not finding one, wiped his lips with the palm of his hand and sipped his beer. "Started out as me being a fool. Didn't take your advice, Jeffrey. Figured I was a smart kid and could get away with it. So, to make a long story short, I came up with a cunning plan." "What kind of plan?" "Well, listen to this. I wonder if these moms do any parenting at all," Brian thought, cringing at the squealing of children. He himself was lying on the top shelf, trying to fall asleep to the measured clatter of the wheels. But how could he fall asleep to the squeals? They say it's good to sleep on trains. That's a lie. The neighbor from the bottom shelf looked at him guiltily. "Did we wake you up?" "Excuse me, please?" He turned away without answering anything. It was sickening enough as it was. He boarded this train with one single thought persistently drilling into his brain. "I'm broke. I'm a beggar. Not only am I a beggar, but I owe everyone in the world." Realizing this proved to be an impossible task. It's hard to readjust. You still act like a wealthy man. You retain your old tastes and habits, and then you stumble over and over again with undeniable truths. You're left with nothing but debt. Instead of your favorite restaurant, you go to a stall for a hot dog, and instead of throwing away a shoe that has fallen apart, you glue it on. From the usual stores, too, it is better to give up. Now you have to go to the market. It's disgusting, but where to go? 6 months ago he had money, opportunities, and a more or less peaceful life. Now there's no business, no peace of mind, nothing at all, not even money for a separate compartment. He again remembered in detail the day when he could still change something, but who to blame? He himself chose not to listen to the voice of reason and indulged his own stubbornness, and for that he had paid the price. He was awakened by a phone call. That in itself was cause for a bad mood, but it was Jeffrey. He never bothered anyone for nothing. I'd have to answer it. "Hello," he mumbled into the receiver. "Woke you up." "I don't care. Why are you calling?" "Warehouse has caught fire." "Earthquake," Jeffrey replied almost nonchalantly. "It pains me to tell you this, Brian, but I'm afraid our network won't survive the crisis. We need to sit it out, wait it out." "What?" Brian asked sleepily and yawned loudly. "Look, Jeff, I've told you how many times. No working information until 11:00, except for the most urgent. I'm still not awake and not thinking straight anyway."
"Sorry," his interlocutor replied dryly. "You have 40 minutes to wake up. I'm on my way to your place." He passed out.
Brian pulled the blanket off the bed, wrapped himself in it like a cloak, and strode barefoot into the kitchen to warm water. He was desperate for coffee. Brian preferred not to think about what he was going to hear in 40 minutes. He knew damn well, without any smart uncles, that this was a volatile time for business. "So what do you want to do?" lower prices or raise salesmen's wages so they don't quit. And how does it coincide with the interests of the business? His cause, by the way. He's a businessman, not a philanthropist. Jeffrey showed up exactly 40 minutes later, as promised, not a second late. Nerd. Precision as the courtesy of King's Brian greeted him. Let's go to the kitchen. I'm waking up in there. Do you want a splash of coffee? No thanks, he sat down at the table and pulled some papers out of his briefcase. Look at this, Brian. He slid his eyes indifferently over neatly filled tables and some boring sheets. Well, what's this? These Jeffrey picked up the top sheets, are estimates from suppliers. Next is logistics. Look at the payroll here, and here are the electric bills, but most importantly, the monthly reports. How scary, Brian made scary eyes. But Jeffrey didn't even smile. Scary we're in a financial hole, Brian and before it gets worse. Brian jumped up and walked nervously along the table, adjusting his crooked chair for some reason. So, what's this got to do with? Well, the crisis. Is this the first time? Things will get better soon. I doubt it. It used to get better because people had to go to the stores anyway, buy there, choose from what we are ready to offer them. So now what's changed? Jeffrey sighed. An online marketplace that provides a huge range. Do you have any idea what that is? A monster that will wipe out live commerce at the root, and their prices, mind you, are significantly lower. Now don't be in a hurry. These marketplaces of yours are just a trendy toy that everyone will soon get bored of. People like it when they have the opportunity to smell, touch the goods. You're already scared. People will realize very soon how great it is to shop around the country and compare prices. Reviews save money and time. It used to be the privilege of only the very rich, but now it's available to everyone. Oh, listen to you, it's like everything. It's the end of the world. Not the end, but the best thing we can do now is slow down and go online too and lower prices like everyone else. We'll have to. But we'll be able to win on employee wages. We won't have to pay the salespeople anymore. Look, Brian, I'm not kidding. We're going to lose everything if we don't suspend our operations. Right now, there's still a chance to save anything. In 6 months, it'll be gone. Oh, don't lecture me, Brian snapped back. As we've worked, so we'll work. That's it. There's nothing to talk about.
I should have listened to Jeffrey, Brian thought for the umpteenth time. I should have. But what are you talking about now? You stuck your neck out like a donkey and walked away. Here's your principles. Eat up. Don't be deceived.
On the next shelf, the baby cried again. The mother immediately came up, whispered, took her loud-voiced child in her arms. It didn't help. The baby continued to cry, louder and louder. Brian buried himself in his pillow and covered himself with a blanket. When he stepped off the iron step and onto the platform, he breathed a sigh of relief. How tired was he of this journey? It had been a long time since he had traveled by train. He had always preferred airplanes and was used to business class. But now he had to remember the forgotten past, and it would be better to forget it all back soon. 3 days in a parlor car equaled 3 years in a communal apartment. Children screaming and running back and forth without stopping. Men drink and argue politics out of boredom. Students are a separate problem. Why are they so noisy? They roar like horses. They sing songs to the accompaniment of a guitar, and they're hugging in the vestibule. Thank heavens. It's all over. Now he would come home. The last time he called home his home was 20 years ago. When he left, he hoped with all his heart that he'd never come back here again. But he had to. Life forced him to, and there was no reason to get cocky in front of his acquaintances. The streets familiar from his childhood were bustling with people and cars, but Brian didn't notice the hustle and bustle. It suddenly seemed to him that he was watching some old, infinitely old movie, where he was 17 years old again. After all, nothing had changed. Well, maybe some new signs have been added. The coffee shop at the station changed its name. It used to be called the Roadhouse. Now it's the Tired Wanderer. But in essence, it's the same as before, and it's like he's back to his old self. No money again, not a dime in his pocket, same as before. Okay, stop whining, he mentally ordered himself. You want to get out of the hole. Not to complain, but to act. Only his mother had agreed to what he had planned. After all, her permission was still required. Once in his yard, Brian stood for a few minutes, looking at the house where he had spent his childhood and part of his youth. How strange. Had he really lived here once? A 5-story gray stone building, small windows with still old-fashioned wooden frames on them. Brian remembered the wonderful thing he'd done when he was a kid, insulating the windows for winter. They used to put absorbent cotton between the frames. It had to be stuffed into the gaps of the closed window so that the wool wouldn't fall out. Additionally, the gap was sealed with painter's tape or just long strips of paper. Indeed, it became warmer. But the window could not be opened until spring, and in spring all this construction was removed. The windows were ceremoniously washed, and one could live quietly until the cold weather. More convenient plastic ones appeared much later. And what kind of junk on the long balconies can be seen? They are still used as storerooms for garbage. The horror. Parking, of course, there is no parking lot. The cars are mostly old cars parked according to the principle of who got up first is the place to go. And there's the merry-go-round she and her friends used to ride in 6th grade. It's still standing there all twisted, and no one had fixed it in all those years. There was a peculiar smell of wet stone in the entryway, so someone had recently scrubbed the floor. But at least they cleaned. He went up to the 3rd floor, stepped to the familiar door, and pressed the bell button. Emily had been on her feet since 6:00 this morning and had run to the market before noon, where she had left almost half of her pension, but it couldn't be otherwise, for her son was coming to visit. The last time they saw each other was 20 years ago, just after Brian received his school-leaving certificate and rushed to the train station the next day to conquer the capital. Conquered, I guess. In any case, he occasionally sent his mother money orders and wished her a happy New Year, and on all her requests to drop by at least for a couple of days. He always said that he was working. No time at all.
Maybe I'll come to you then, she suggested. Cook you something delicious. See how you live. I've never been to your place.
So you'll come and sit at home all day, he asked, and in his voice I could already clearly hear the irritation. Why home? Because you don't know the city. And I only come home for the night. That's it, Mom. Emily hung up the phone and sighed softly. She couldn't forgive herself for living with Brian's father for so long. What kind of example was he setting for his son? All he knew was to get drunk and change mistresses, and no respect for his parents. If it wasn't for Emily, there'd be no one to take care of them. They loved her, called her daughter. She should have divorced her husband, but she didn't have the courage. So the boy saw all that art, grew up selfish, and now he came to see me. How could you not take him in like a human being? Brian loved meat pies and his mom's borscht. So when she got home, Emily rushed into the kitchen to prepare a treat. For the arrival of her favorite son, maybe he'd stay home. Yes, we'll be refreshed. Remember that there are such things as family and the warmth of the hearth. At the sharp ringing of the doorbell, she dropped the spoon she was stirring the roast with. Ah, what a pity that there was no time to tidy up. Now she would appear to her son disheveled, in a robe, without makeup, running past the mirror in the hallway. Emily rubbed her cheeks a little. At least a blush would appear. Emily held out her arms to him. Her son leaned over politely and touched her cheek lightly with his lips.
Hey, Mom, how are you doing?
Something wasn't right. Something wasn't right at all. And it wasn't that, it was hard to recognize the 17-year-old boy she remembered in this grown-up, motherly man. It was just that her son looked at her so coldly, studying her, as if it was not his mother standing in front of him, but a complete stranger, perhaps even an adversary. His mother's eyes were faded, as if burned out, like a once bright cloth under the hot southern sun. And something important was missing from them. Brian couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Had she stopped coloring her eyelashes? But when he looked closer, he realized it wasn't her eyelashes. It was just that his mother's eyes were sad. There were no usual sparks of laughter in them. That's strange. Mom was always so cheerful, loved to laugh and infect others with her laughter. What happened to her? So this is how you live, he said, looking around at the old furnishings. The sofa, which he remembered from his early childhood, must be all beaten up. You'd have to lie down, and the springs would be digging into your sides. True, his mother had covered it with an orange plaid, but that was just a trick to hide the worn upholstery. The TV's on the nightstand, and the only new technology is a laptop. What's the mother want it for? I wonder if she's on Classmates. Maybe you watch movies, though. So you're living, you don't change anything. I live the same way, Emily replied. Brian stood up, walked across the room, and looked up. Look, there's a crack in the ceiling, there in the corner. See, he pointed his finger. It's understandable, though, how old this wallpaper is. Not remembering the food, for which he'd lost interest, Brian squatted down, pulled back a corner of the rug, and peered at the floor at the baseboard. What did you ask? There's a gap between the wall and the baseboard. We'll have to put in here, she said. What's that for, Brian? I'm fine as I am, he frowned.
And how are you doing? The woman asked.
Go see for yourself, Emily shrugged. clearly annoyed by her son's questioning. Somehow, this wasn't human. They'd met and Brian hadn't even hugged her. He hadn't asked her about her health or tasted her mother's treats. She'd tried so hard to please her boy. She'd been looking forward to seeing him. But the son almost immediately began to walk around the apartment, inspecting the shortcomings, and started talking about repairs, as if he hadn't come to his mother's house, but to buy a home. The tiles are almost falling off, and the faucets should be replaced, she said. We'll replace them. We'll replace them. What's wrong, Mom? He sat down again on the chair opposite and looked at her reproachfully. You don't look after the house at all. You've neglected everything. It's going to take a lot of repairs alone. Emily smiled openly, simple-mindedly, like a child. It's true what they say. Old people are like children, Brian thought fleetingly. Where am I going to get the money for repairs, Brian? I can't afford it on my pension. Medicines have gotten expensive. Or haven't you been home in 20 years? You've forgotten how we live here. Stop it, Mother, he grumbled. Forgotten, not forgotten. What does it matter? After all, I've explained it all to you already. There was plenty of work to do. I didn't bend my back for my uncle or sit on a salary like some people. Of course, it's easier for them. You work from 10 to 6 and walk away. Why don't you have any vacations at all? She asked. Employees have vacations, the son said patiently. It was obvious that this conversation was making him nervous. In your own business? It's like the commercials say, work 24/7. If you go away for a week, they'll steal everything. It must be hard. His mother looked at him sympathetically.
Her look made Brian uncomfortable. How infuriating was this kinship thing, wasn't it? He'd long ago considered that he had no kin, and his mother didn't count either.
Yeah, she'd raised him and all that. But first of all, she was legally obligated to take care of him until he came of age. And secondly, he'd already been living on his own for 20 years. Well, she sent him some money at first, but that was a long time ago. And he himself, let's be honest, would never have come here if it weren't for the need. Well, at least you'll stay here, get a break from everything, continued my mother. You want to lie down on the sofa, and I'll bring you some pies. Or maybe it's hot. Better borscht. I made some delicious borscht. Brian mentally cursed. He'd had enough of borscht and pies. He hadn't come here to eat. Thank you, Mother, thank you. But I'm not hungry yet. That's what I've come for. I'm in trouble. What's the trouble? She asked. Emily was alarmed. You're not ill, no. That's different. You see, there's a crisis everywhere now. Money is depreciating, that's right, Mom nodded. Prices change every week. I used to buy milk for 45 rubles, but since Monday it's already 47. And then they have taken the fashion. They write on the price tags large, for example, 47 rubles, and next to a small font 0.99 rubles. But it's almost 48 rubles. No money will be enough. I once met Aunt Lucy in the supermarket, a neighbor from the 4th floor. I remember her son Alex was friends with you. He's a salesman now. He's got a technical degree, Brian wondered. Yeah, Emily grinned wryly. So he's a tech salesman, computers, cell phones. So I met Aunt Lucy and I saw her take a caramel from the ones they sell in bulk and eat it.
Then she walked on and snatched another one again. And believe me, Brian, I'm looking at it and I'm ashamed. I'm hiding behind the racks and I'm not breathing. What's the matter with her? Maybe there's something wrong with her head. He asked her why she was stealing, but her mother shook her stealing. No, son, there's nothing wrong with her head. She just can't afford to buy candy, but she wants to.
Alex can't help her. I've got 2 kids growing up myself. My wife is on maternity leave with them. I felt sorry for her. I went the next day, picked up these caramels. Then I went to her. I said, Lucy, they gave me a treat at work, and I don't like sweets. Take some for yourself. Eat them with your tea so you work. Mother, he rejoiced. If so, maybe I won't have to. Maybe things will be resolved more easily. Jeffrey immediately daydreamed. What kind of work could she do at her age? Well, maybe cleaning somewhere for a penny? That's all the income. Yes, that's right, mopping floors in a bakery, Emily confirmed his guess. Unofficially, of course, they don't pay much, but that's thanks enough, isn't it? I saw Aunt Lucy again the next day, only this time she took an apple and ate it. And it's a good thing she ate some fruit. After that, she didn't buy a little bit, though, but she brought me back change. There's plenty of it. What else is there? He wondered, but he had already forgotten about her. I'll have to go there soon and have a look around. The house is a wreck, of course. It was a wreck 20 years ago, but the land is the land. The main thing is that if the apple trees bear fruit, It's not bad at all. Oh, it's not bad. No, come on, Brian. He cheered himself up. It looks like it's going to work out. It's going to work out. I thought you sold the cottage a long time ago, he said, trying to stealthily turn the conversation to the main topic of his concern. No, Brian, why would I sell it? I grow potatoes, tomatoes, and cucumbers and apple trees on it. If I sell it, I'll have to buy it all at the store. But Brian tried to put the right note of concern and slight worry in his tone. It must be hard for you, traveling back and forth with the crops. The mother sighed heavily. But where to go? You have to live somehow. It's always the same song, Brian thought irritably, tossing and turning on the old and uncomfortable sofa. His mother had made his bed here for a reason. He'd asked for it. The fool, he said. I want to remember my childhood well. Did he remember? The wall clock ticked annoyingly loudly. How could my mother fall asleep to that? Why do these pensioners get so attached to all kinds of junk? Why do I need this watch? Can't you watch the time on your phone? What's this summer house for? Growing an apple tree when apples cost a penny at the store. Buy yourself 10, you'll eat them yourself and have enough left over for your famous Charlotte. But no, you have to go to the Dhaka. She saves money, you see. And if you calculate, even in a rough way, the travel back and forth, then still water, vegetable garden, irrigation, a lot of effort to grow something there. It's a golden harvest. She saves money, economist. But how pleasant it is to bring her neighbors gifts, for her own money, by the way. Just this, please, and no financial literacy, he thought with a new attack of rage. But in fact, he was angry not so much at his mother as at himself. He hadn't been the smartest either. He hadn't listened to Jeffrey, and now I had to deal with the consequences. Do I look like my mother? Just like her, shallow. The thought was so depressing that Brian immediately felt like a 5-year-old kid who'd been given a book instead of a toy for New Year's Eve. He wanted to resent the whole world, crawl under the couch and start crying. Except he's not 5 anymore. Oh, not 5. And instead of a disgusting book, he got a collapse of business and complete lack of money. And you can't just crawl under the couch. Emily couldn't sleep either. Her son's unimportant sudden arrival, his strange aloofness, it was confusing. Why had he come, when from all appearances he didn't miss his mother at all? Didn't Emily miss him? Emily had a way of appearing like a simple-minded retired grandmother when necessary, but she really wasn't. In her conversation with her son, she deliberately left out a lot of things. For example, that her job was not scrubbing floors in the bakery. Having retired, Emily with a month of bewilderment, and then realized to sit idle, a luxury is not for a pensioner. To get a job, of course, was difficult. At every interview, she was politely refused. Age, I'm sorry, we have a young team, or even simpler, will you be on sick leave? You have a line to the doctor, the hospital, the dispensary, and we pay you. It was offensive to hear this, so she decided not to waste time. She called her previous place of work, talked to young people, and learned that it was possible to earn money from home. Emily decided to keep up with life and continued to work, but already, as they say now, on a remote.
And why not? For an experienced accountant, this is a very good opportunity. Of course, she was going to tell Brian about it. She wanted to brag about her success, but then she realized, no, it was too soon to share the news. It was better to keep quiet for now. Something told her that her son hadn't come for nothing, but for some very specific reason that he wasn't telling her about. And if that was the case, it would be wise for her to wait with revelations for the time being. She didn't say that it had been 5 years since love had come into her life.
Although it would be more accurate to say, returned. She and Ethan had known each other for a long time, since high school. Emily, then just Em, studied in a parallel class with Ethan, and every time she met the blue-eyed handsome boy in the school corridors, she felt her heart sink. Emily had never dreamed of the attention of such a guy, who was secretly admired by half of the high school girls. Ethan could choose any girl he wanted, and there were smart girls who were going for a gold medal, or at least a silver medal. There were also beautiful ones. Take Sarah Johnson. Oh, what a girl she was. Tall, statuesque, with a thick blonde braid below her knees, black eyes like an Italian mother, and what eyelashes, dark, thick, with a beautiful curve. When she lowered her eyes, the shadow of these luxurious eyelashes fell in a semicircle on her cheeks. And besides the smart and pretty ones, there were also the talented ones. Laura, who could sketch a portrait of anyone in 5 minutes. Kate was a local celebrity who played in all the school plays. Emily, on the other hand, was just an ordinary girl. She studied easily, moderately hard, but she was never an honors student, nor did she want to be. No one would call Emily a beauty, but not a dunce either, so pretty, no more than that. and Emily didn't have any creative ability. No, she had nothing to attract attention. And she didn't need to. There were plenty of other girls. She thought Ethan didn't even notice her. But one mysterious incident changed everything. Once, when she returned in the early spring morning, Emily found on her windowsill a fresh branch of lilacs, still in dew. The lilacs were large, beautiful, and smelled so intoxicating that she could hold them in her hands all day long. When Emily looked out the window, she saw no one, and then she had to pack up and run to school. So the incident slipped her mind pretty quickly. But the next morning it happened again. An open window and a fragrant branch. What's the mystery? No one around. On the way to school, Emily thought that boys were strange creatures after all. But what was the point of all those flowers if it wasn't clear who was giving them? At least this mysterious admirer would write a note. Otherwise, you want to come up. Thank you. But to whom? There were still 10 minutes before the beginning of classes, and in the schoolyard reigned the usual fun bustle. Friends were saying hello to each other. Someone, sitting on the porch, was hurriedly finishing his homework. A little farther away, at the fence, Emily saw Ethan, surrounded by a flock of girls. They were smart and beautiful, and even talented, and all of them, interrupting each other, talked about the approaching graduation. Ethan didn't take part in the discussion, but let the girls talk. Emily stopped nearby, pretending to look for something in her briefcase. It's spring, exams are coming up, and our graduation will be there, Kate sighed suddenly, and we'll go our separate ways. Maybe we'll never see each other again. I'm going to New York. I want to go to acting school. You, Ethan, into the army. Jessica's going to New York too. Why don't we go together? No way, the other one replied. Personally, I'm staying here. I'll get married. A woman, if she's beautiful, has no reason to hustle. To work, Kate bit her lip resentfully, and the other girls giggled. She never missed an opportunity to emphasize who was the first beauty here, and at the same time to humiliate the competitors. So the crowd was happy that this time it was not them. Well, if there are no other talents than beauty, then the best thing to do is to get married, Kate thought. Who are you going to marry? Well, see, then I have no one to marry. You'd better tell me what dress I should wear to the prom. Blue or lilac, Ethan said suddenly, and looked at Emily intently. Yeah, I really like lilac. Emily shuddered, blood rushing to her face, and, agonizingly afraid of blushing, she hurried off to class. Now that so many years had passed, Emily sometimes asked herself, why did she get so embarrassed? Why? Wasn't it hard to at least smile at a guy in love? After all, he was probably expecting it. But to her, raised in modesty, it seemed that the handsome Ethan just decided to make a joke on an unattractive girl. And when 40 years later they met quite by chance, being in the same checkout line at the store, Ethan, remembering the past, admitted, remember when I said about the lilacs? Well, of course I remember. Only I couldn't have imagined that you did. Silly Ethan reproached himself without malice. I should have approached you myself, and I was shy, walking in circles, and you blushed so much. It was immediately clear to me that you guessed. I thought that since you ran away so quickly, it means that you didn't like me. No, Ethan, just the opposite. Really, you thought that, didn't you? You know, I really wanted to try my luck again at the prom, to ask you to dance, to ask you directly. But you didn't come to the prom. I did, Emily confessed embarrassedly. I got chicken pox right before prom. You know, there was no way I was going to make it. Oh, I was so upset. It's funny to remember now. But then I looked at my new dress, and I cried. I roared until my mom took it out of my sight. She looked with a smile at this grown-up man, but so touching in his memories of his first love. How little did you know about girls, Ethan? And here I thought you were a sophisticated young man, a womanizer by then. Yes, he laughed, and I wasn't. But the girls were after you, and they were after you big time, and don't deny it. I've seen it all, I did, Ethan agreed, but I didn't need them. I was in love with you. I guess I should have been more decisive. Oh, what the hell? Listen, I invite you to visit. You don't have to be jealous. My wife won't be here. I mean, we're, almost classmates. Let's go. I agree, Emily replied. Besides, there's no one to be jealous of. I separated from my husband a long time ago. Ethan took her bags and shook his head, and I was too embarrassed to ask why you were carrying such heavy things yourself. And it turns out, too bad you don't. I was sure you'd be able to build a strong, happy family. I can't tell you how happy I was when my husband finally left. Ethan stopped and looked at her confused. Happy? You were happy? Very, Emily laughed. You know, better no husband than a drinking, philandering one. And the worst of it was that I wouldn't have left him myself. You haven't forgotten how we were brought up, have you? It was a shame to get divorced. If we got married, we had to live together. So we lived together. And then there was such happiness. He found someone else and went to her, and I'm free. You wouldn't believe it. Ethan and I danced all over the apartment that day. And then I baked a cake and sat in front of the TV and cut myself a huge piece. I sat on the couch, eating, and some comedy was on, I remember. And this feeling that I don't have to agree anymore, that I don't have to wiggle my way through the evening. To understand, to justify. Oh, that was a relief. Ethan and I promised myself that I would never take my husband back. And he begged and begged. But I'd already tasted freedom once.
You always knew how to surprise me, Emily, he said.
And you know, I'm happy you haven't changed, she replied. He helped her carry her bags all the way to her apartment. And then they just sat in the kitchen, drinking flavored tea and talking. They had a lot to tell each other about all the untold things of their youth and what came afterward. So imperceptibly, without noise and a stormy boil of passions, in Emily's life came love. It was the love of two adults, many experienced people, care for each other, respect and warmth. That's what their relationship consisted of. And Emily often thought that nothing better than that had ever happened to her. But Brian didn't know anything about it yet, and would he? She had a sudden urge to call Ethan right now, to talk to him, to hear his voice. But it was nighttime. There wouldn't be a man. With a sigh, Emily rolled over onto her side, closed her eyes, and began counting sheep like a child. Early in the morning, Brian found his mother in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, wrapped in a shawl, absent-mindedly stirring her tea. Seeing her son, Emily smiled. Something's been keeping me awake. You started to tell me yesterday that you were in some kind of trouble, but somehow you never finished. Brian sat up and poured himself some tea as well. Trouble. That's putting it mildly, he said with a heavy sigh. In fact, I'm in what you might call a disaster. Everything I've worked for so many years has gone to waste. He raised inflamed eyes to his mother. Everything you know? My business just got eaten up by the competition. Bandits? Emily asked fearfully.
No, the recession. Those businessmen with their online stores who started slashing prices, that's how they tore everything down.
I can't. They can, but I can't. They don't have rent for retail space. They don't have such expenses for utilities. They don't have to pay the vendors. And you, can't you go online like them? I can, but I have to pay off my debts first, and I don't have any money. I've already sold everything I can get my hands on. Oh, Brian's mother was shocked into silence. Sure, Brian was far from a perfect son, but he was still a son. She felt sorry for him. He'd worked for so many years, never been home, never had a family of his own, and to be left with nothing in one fell swoop. I'll get out, he said firmly.
I'll get out. But you've got to help me, you know. I need to get this apartment vacated, and the summer house too. Then I can put some money into renovations and rent out both. That'll keep me going. And then I'll find a job. But right now, holding on is the most important thing. You see, Mom's confused. She's not the same anymore, Brian said.
Where am I supposed to go? How am I going to get you out of your apartment? Emily asked. I've already thought of that, he answered so quickly that there was no doubt. He had indeed thought of everything. We'll put you in a nursing home. Temporarily, until I'm up again. In the meantime, you'll have to live there. Why? They'll feed you, and the doctors will look after you. So you won't even have to go to the clinic, and you won't have to socialize with just anyone, but with quite decent people. But I'll visit. How can you? And then when this black streak is over, I'll take you away. Well, you know, Brian and Emily stood up and wrapped her shawl more tightly. I didn't expect this from you. What did you expect? He asked dejectedly. That I'd go back to my native land and go to work as a janitor. I'd rather be a janitor than put my mother in an almshouse. There you go again. He struck the table with his fist in annoyance. What almshouse? A normal institution for the elderly. It's not like I'm throwing you out on the street. After all, why don't you help your son? You haven't shown your face around here in 20 years, and now all of a sudden you remember you're a son. No, Brian, you can't expect that kind of help from me, and I don't want to hear any of it. But Mom, he tried to put a childishly whimsical note in his voice. Not for long. Just for a couple months, and then I'll take you away. That's right. Emily turned away from the window, and the sunny spring day suddenly seemed gray and dirty, as if a child had been painting with watercolors and then spilled water from a glass on the fresh drawing. So that was why Brian had come, to put his mother in a nursing home, and to take possession of the cottage and provide himself with the standard of living to which he was accustomed. Again, the old remorse woke up and clawed at her heart. It is my fault. I put up with a worthless husband because of stupid conventions and made my son put up with it. Every day he saw his own father despised and hated by everyone but the bottle. I should have gotten a divorce. I should have what did Brian grow up to be, exactly like his dad. The only difference is that to his father all that mattered was the booze, but to Brian nothing matters but money. Suddenly she felt disgusted with herself, weak and unable to transcend the rules no one wanted, afraid of being judged. Who would judge her? Neighborhood gossipers, colleagues at work. But after all, she could trade the apartment and move out of here, and she could quit her job and find another one. Maybe I deserve all this, Emily thought. And now she was paying for what she'd done. Where are you going to live yourself, she asked. I'll rent a doghouse, but that'll do for a while. And we'll see, she nodded. Then silently she left the kitchen and went to her room to pack. Not much junk, Brian said, taking the suitcase from her. He picked it up and shook it gently. Clearly the suitcase was half empty. Only things that are truly dear to me are in there, Mother said. Old photographs, letters, and a few favorite books. The rest is yours to dispose of as you wish. A cab pulled up to the house, and Brian took Emily's hand. Well, get settled in. Let me give you a hand. He himself settled into the front seat and nodded nonchalantly to the driver. You know the Hope Nursing Home? Drive there. Emily stared out the window without looking away. They were met at the entrance by a smiling person. Good afternoon. I'll show you to your room. You show me, Brian said impatiently, and tossed his suitcase to his mother. And I have business to attend to. Sorry, I'm in a hurry. He walked quickly back to the waiting car. It worked. It all worked. His heart sang joyfully. For the time being, he would rent out his mother's dacha, and in a couple of months he would talk to her so that she would reissue everything to him. And then he would go up again, sell it, and be able to invest the money in business. Just 2 or 3 months to wait, just nothing, and it's better to get a job now. Then the money from the rent will be able to save. By the way, the job was the easiest. He had already had time to look through the vacancies and sent responses to a couple of good places. Everything had worked out fine. Let's go back now, he commanded the cabbie, and make it quick. I'm getting hungry. He wasn't lying. Indeed, for the first time in the few days he had spent in his hometown, he felt a beastly appetite. Until today, he'd had trouble forcing himself to eat anything. Now he would eat it in one sitting without choking on it. It was getting hotter and hotter outside. Brian was glad to expose his face to the sun's gentle rays. It felt good. Emily sat on the bed in her new home and looked sadly at her surroundings. The bare walls were neatly painted a pastel pink color, but there were no pictures, no vase with a flower, and there were no curtains on the windows, blinds. The bed is made almost like a soldier's. A blanket, a plaid, a pillow in a corner. There's a desk by the window. There's a nightstand by the bed, clean, pleasant. A cozy place for those who have nowhere else to go. She pulled out her cell phone and called the one person who still cared about her. Ethan. Ethan cheered. I was just about to call you myself. Do you want to go to a movie? I'll be busy until 6, and I can pick you up by 7:30. No, she begged. You don't have to pick me up. You see, I've moved here. Where at this hour? Ethan wondered. Emily, please don't speak in riddles.
Explain where you moved to and why, she said. Emily felt a lump come up to her throat and barely managed to swallow it. Brian's here. He's lost all his money. He needs an apartment to rent out, and I
see, Ethan hissed. Give me the address. I'll be there soon. Ethan, don't. The address, Emily.
I can find out myself, but it will be longer.
All right, write it down.
Ethan arrived an hour after the call.
Why didn't you tell me everything right away? He asked. Why didn't you call right away, before you even got here? Emily lowered her eyes. I was so embarrassed. Ethan, what would I have told you? That my son kicked me out of the house. I don't know why he acted like a scoundrel, and I'm ashamed for some reason. She took his hand. Listen to me and try to understand. I'm very sorry for him. I couldn't make up my mind to get a divorce, and that's how it came about. Brian didn't have a good example in front of him, only a bad one. I felt like I had to keep my family together so Brian wouldn't grow up without a father. I didn't realize at the time that I would rather have no father than a father like that, and now I'm paying the price for that indecision. It's my fault my son grew up like this. He was silent for a moment, pulling Emily's head to his shoulder. I don't think that's true, he said. No matter how hard you try, you can't be a perfect parent. Everyone makes mistakes, but when you become an adult, you have to raise yourself. You can't put everything on your parents, and you can't take all the blame. Brian's a big boy, and I wish I'd never gotten him. I would never have let him send you here. And I'm not going to let you stay here. This is a place for lonely people with no one to take care of them. You're not alone, you have me. Pack up, we're leaving now. But where to? I don't have a home. I have nowhere to go.
What do you mean, where? To me, of course, he looked at his beloved with a definite reproach. Emily, for 5 years I've been begging you to be my wife, and you've resisted. Well, I hope that at least now you will not object. Eh? Or are you going to look for reasons again?
I can't do that, she sighed. But how can we live together? We're not married yet. When she saw the man's eyes widen in amazement, she laughed merrily.
Brian was almost happy. He had been invited to an interview at a great place, perhaps the best place in this city. A large marketing agency. There are always great prospects there. And besides, he was a good fit for them. His knowledge of the field is expert, to say the least. As a marketer, he's a genius. He may have lost one business, but he did not give up and built a clear plan. And most importantly, he found the money for its realization.
That's, talent. Talent. The interview was scheduled for 11:00, but already from 07:00, Brian had not found a place. When was the last time I was this anxious, he asked himself. But he couldn't remember. Even before his first date in his life, he had been almost calm. Well, a little shy, but certainly not this much excitement. Although, of course, it's understandable. A date is just a date. A lot depends on the results of the interview, maybe even everything. Of course, there are other vacancies, and sooner or later he will get a job somewhere. But he wanted this agency, a solid position, high salary, and with all the new opportunities. After all, had he spent so much time building his own business for nothing? And not somewhere, but in the capital, where competition and for every meter of space sharks so much that only have time to dodge. And he'd been dodging for 2 decades. Humming, Brian tied his tie and once again meticulously assessed his appearance in the mirror. Everything was fine. Except that he'd fluffed his hair a little, giving himself a little deliberate carelessness. It's only the small clerks who always walk around polished, as if their wives had combed their hair an hour before they went out, like Don Corleone. A really serious man doesn't need such nonsense. Everything was perfect now. The office was right in the center of town, and Brian, finding himself in a bustling, crowded street, experienced a new burst of energy, just like in the capital. He loved its frenzied rhythm, life at breakneck speed. I miss it, he thought. Nothing. Soon, very soon, all this will be over. All this mess. And he could finally go back to where he felt good. He didn't call his mother on purpose. Let her miss him more. Then there would be a better chance that she wouldn't be stubborn and would be more willing to sign all the papers. True, Emily hadn't called him either. But Brian put that down to a simple resentment. It's a well-known fact. Women first get offended. And then, when they realize that no one is going to ask for their forgiveness, they get bored. So don't interfere with this process. I'm here for an interview, Brian informed the girl at the reception desk. My name is... I know, she smiled broadly. You're the only suitable applicant so far. Come on in.
They went up to the 2nd floor.
I like your place already, Brian said, looking around. Beautiful renovations, lots of colors, and the location is great. It's a policy of our management, she replied. Ethan Smith believes that employees should feel as good as possible at work. Otherwise, they won't be much use.
That Ethan Smith is a fool, Brian thought gloomily. If you give these employees a free hand, they'll stop working at all. But they don't forget to demand a pay raise.
By the way, the girl continued, Ethan Smith conducts all interviews personally. So now you'll meet him too. Hold on a second. Ethan Smith turned out to be an imposing man and hardly older than 60. Cheerful Grandpa, Brian thought. It's true that such people have a hard time accepting new things. They like to work the old-fashioned way, but maybe we'll get along. It wouldn't take long anyway. Ethan Garcia, meanwhile, was quickly making some notes in his diary. When he saw the visitor, he looked up. Come in, take a chair, have a seat. Thank you.
So I've reviewed your resume. And overall I like it, but there are a few questions.
Please ask, Brian smiled.
Well, okay, let's get started. You were the owner of your own business in New York City. Here you have it stated here that it lasted for quite a while. What changed?
Some financial difficulties due to the recession. Debts, but I'm going to repay them little by little. I see. So why did you suddenly decide to move to our city? Why didn't you stay in the metropolis? After all, you probably have connections there and a better chance of getting a high-paying job than in the provinces.
Brian gritted his teeth. What an intractable old man, he thought.
I had to sell off all my possessions to pay off my debts, he said. So it's all very trivial. I just don't have a place to live in Norway.
Do you have any relatives here?
Yes, my mother. She unfortunately needs special care, so she lives in a boarding house for the elderly. That's how it is. Ethan Garcia smiled. I was under the impression that Emily was quite an independent person. So do you two know each other? And close enough. Emily is my fiancée. As for you, boy, Ethan Garcia rose from the table. Trust me, you won't get a job in this town. And I wouldn't advise you to hope for an inheritance either. I'll make sure you puppy don't get any of what your mama owns and will continue to own. How can you? Get away, Ethan Garcia interrupted him. In parting, I will give you one piece of advice after all. Get out of this town and don't come back here. There's nothing here for you. That's the story. Jeffrey finished his tale. Brian drank his beer in a gulp. I had to use my last dime to get tickets and go. Where was I supposed to go? Came back to the Big Apple, thought I'd make some money. I still had some connections after all. But what? Nothing. Don't you know the ins and outs of this town? As long as you're on top, everyone adores you and wants to be friends with you. If you lose everything, you lose your friends, your buddies first. What's your mother? Jeffrey asked.
Brian shrugged. I don't know. She's doing okay, I guess. Sends me a little money every once in a while. Doesn't want to talk. She's understandable.
It's understandable. I wanted to take everything I had from her, so I'm not offended. He stood up from the cheap plastic chair and smiled. Jeffrey, thank you, brother, for dinner. I'm gonna go. Where are you going? The man wanted to stop him, but restrained himself in time. What could he do? Offer Brian a place to sleep or a job to a man who had just talked without any embarrassment about sending his mother to a nursing home to take possession of her property. His own mother. And is it hard to imagine what such a man is capable of doing to a stranger, even one who would lend him a helping hand? No, you can't. It is too dangerous. Goodbye. Brian tossed over his shoulder, heading for the exit. Jeffrey's lips trembled. Goodbye, he whispered soundlessly. Amanda looked up. She raised her head, trying to look up to the roof of the 16-story building. She had to squint all the time. Heavy drops of cold fall rain were falling from the sky. The girl was already completely soaked and cold. At least she should have been, because she had left the house in what she was wearing, shorts and a long, stretched t-shirt. And it's October outside. People are already wearing jackets and bouncing around, and then there's that nasty rain. But Amanda felt almost nothing physically right now. All of her senses were overshadowed by heartache. So much so that she didn't even want to live. What was there to live for? What was ahead of her now but shame and a meaningless, miserable existence? Not only that she had sealed her fate, but she would ruin her family's life if she stayed with them. No, it would be better to disappear from this world altogether, Amanda said. That's why she'd come to the only high-rise in the neighborhood. The other houses were two low Khrushchev 5-story buildings. And the new building, a pleasant soft blue color, towered above them like an ornate candle. The best place could not be thought of. This frightening yet life-saving thought came to Amanda suddenly. She was home alone. Her younger brothers were at school, her father and stepmother at work. Rain drummed against the window, and Amanda sat on her bed with her arms wrapped around her knees and rocked. She seemed to cry when no one was home. The girl could afford to let her feelings come out. Sometimes it got a little easier, but not now, because soon everyone would know everything. She couldn't hide it from her family forever. Then what would she do? No one would support Amanda. They won't kick her out of the house, of course, but they'll blame her all the time. Because she's in trouble. Of course, life will be a never-ending nightmare. And it's all her fault, no one else's. I should have been so stupid. Amanda had never been very close to her father. He seemed to love her, his only daughter, but to talk to his child, to ask how she was doing. No, that never happened. Her father was interested in Amanda's grades, her household needs, sometimes her health. And that was it. The other thing is the sons, the common children with the new wife, Amanda's younger brothers. That's where the father went fishing with them and made jokes. What about the stepmother? When she first married her father, she seemed sympathetic to Amanda. But then she had children of her own, boys who were 1.5 years old. And the girl immediately felt superfluous, like a fifth wheel on a cart. No, her stepmother didn't starve her and didn't bog her down with work, as in old fairy tales, but she didn't give her any warmth. She performed her duties to bring up her stepdaughter as an unloved, but necessary work. That's all. Amanda might not have noticed her parents' coldness toward herself, but she saw how they treated Michael and Timothy, and that sometimes made her hurt and resentful. And lonely. Well, what did you want? Amanda was once enlightened by her neighbor in the stairwell, Aunt Lucy. The girl then studied in the 8th grade and complained to her acquaintance that none of her parents could not come to her on a school holiday. For stepmother, you are a stranger. And your father. Men, they love children from their favorite women. And the woman he loves is his current wife. What about Mom? Amanda took offense to Mom. Tatiana is his past Aunt Lucy sighed heavily. She was once friends with Amanda's mother. Your stepmother is your real stepmother. That's the conclusion to draw. Tears sprang from Amanda's eyes again at the memory of her dearest person. How she missed her mom right now. Mom would definitely have supported her daughter in a difficult situation if she had been there for her. Amanda wouldn't be afraid of anything at that moment. Together they would definitely think of something. Mom never scolded Amanda. If the girl was wrong, she would calmly point out her mistakes and explain at length, in detail, with examples, telling her why it was necessary to act this way and not that way. At that moment, Amanda felt so happy, so loved. Mom was the closest and dearest person for the girl. Her smile was as warm as the sun, and her tender hands seemed to protect her from all troubles and misfortunes. Once Amanda thought her mom was eternal, strong, reliable, and vulnerable. How wrong she was. The tragedy happened when the girl was in the 1st grade. Amanda, as always, came home after school, heated food from the refrigerator, had lunch, did her homework. Her mom was about to come home from work, followed by her dad. A cozy evening with the family lay ahead. Mom would probably come back with buns from the factory canteen. They're so fluffy, so fragrant. Adult and child will drink tea together and talk about everything in the world. Amanda will tell her parents how her teacher praised her today. But it was 7, then 8, and Mom and Dad were still gone. Darkness thickened outside the window. From the street came the long howl of the wind. The February weather had gotten worse. Amanda realized something was wrong. She crawled onto the couch, piled up her pillows, and waited. She was so scared alone in an empty apartment. If only she had a little sister or a brother, it would be more fun together. Amanda asked her parents many times to give birth to someone else, but they laughed and explained that they had a small apartment, 2 rooms only. They would expand, and then they could think about it. Finally, the key turned in the lock. Amanda's heart quickened. She rushed to meet her parents. When she saw her mother, everything would become simple and not scary. Her smile, her voice always drove away fears and worries. On the doorstep stood her father alone. Amanda felt disappointed. It had better be Mom. But it was good that at least Dad had come. He was more fun and less scary. But why is he so glum? His face is literally blank. And what's that alien look in his eyes? Where's Mom? Amanda asked. And then the father told his daughter the terrible truth, which the girl could not believe for a long time afterwards. It turned out that in the factory shop, where her mother worked, there was an accident. The boiler burst. There was a fire. Not everyone was saved. Amanda's mom was among the dead. Then there were funerals, but Amanda was not taken to them. Left with neighbors, they thought that she was too young for such shocks. It was as if the girl had been turned off. For several years she could not smile and almost did not speak. She studied, ate, went to school, even it seems, played with her friends. But she did everything by inertia, machine-like. Amanda herself still remembered her feelings well. It seemed to her that she was in an unreal imaginary world, where everything was not real. That's why she didn't feel anything, a protective reaction of her body. I guess her father was doing the best he could to take care of his daughter, but he wasn't very good at it. Dad couldn't cook, but he was good at frying potatoes. He couldn't braid Amanda's hair either. Honestly, he tried. But they came out sloppy and smelly. In the end, Amanda had to learn to do a lot of things on her own. A kind neighbor, Aunt Lucy, her mother's friend, told her something and she did it herself. Domestic problems distracted Amanda a little and even relieved her condition. Fatigue drowned out the heartache, and yet the girl was very longing. So long that it is impossible to express in words. At night she cried quietly into her pillow, so as not to disturb her father. He promised to take her to a doctor if she didn't come to her senses. But Amanda didn't want to see a doctor, so she put up with it. Gradually, life fell into a familiar pattern. It became less pleasant, less cozy and bright. But there was still room for joy and pleasure in her life. Amanda had desires, dreams, and feelings. It was as if she was revitalized, strengthened, made stronger. And then, 2 years after the tragic events, Amber, the stepmother, appeared in the house. Her father worked as a driver at the bakery, delivering products to stores and stores, sometimes taking his daughter on trips. Amanda loved sitting in the high cab, looking down on the cars. What did it smell like in there? The aroma of fresh baked goods was unmatched. Amber worked as a clerk at one of the outlets her father operated. That's how they met. At first, Amber seemed like a kind, warm-hearted woman, smiling, attentive homemaker. What about her cooking? Oh my God! Pancakes, pies, borscht. Amanda learned a lot from her. The girl was happy. Of course, no one could replace her mother, but a woman's hand in their house was definitely lacking. True, the neighbor Lucy from the very beginning was inclined to Amber cool, to put it mildly. Amanda noticed this dislike of her mom's friend and didn't understand the reason. Then Michael was born. Amanda was happy. She had once dreamed of a brother. The girl helped Amber with everything. Her big sister was a joy to be around, but her stepmother's attitude toward her help had changed. She began to be annoyed by things that before she did not even pay attention to. Why buy old clothes? Do you still have a closet full? Amber reprimanded her spouse. Michael needs a new fall suit. He's growing up fast. Why didn't your daughter do the dishes? What am I, the maid, cleaning up after all of you? I have a baby in my arms. I don't have time. The stepmother would get angry another time, and so on. It got to the point where Amanda tried to avoid seeing the woman again, so as not to cause a new outburst of irritation and aggression. But it didn't help. Amber always found something to pick on. And it was hard not to have contact in a cramped 2-room apartment. Stepmother, father, and baby lived in the living room. Amanda had her own tiny but cozy and, most importantly, separate room. Here the girl felt in relative peace and safety. Only a year after Michael's appearance in the family was born another child, Tamati, and the eldest son was immediately moved into the nursery to Amanda. Now she had to neighbor with a 1.5-year-old baby, who invariably threw her textbooks and notebooks and cried a lot at night. But Amanda was not allowed to complain. Her father would support her stepmother, and she would be completely on her son's side. So she had to bear it. Moreover, sooner or later you get used to everything. When Tamati grew up a little, he was also moved into the nursery. The parents bought the boys bunk beds, which occupied the entire wall. Along the other wall stood Amanda's sofa. There was a desk under the window. There was no room for anything else in the room. Cramped but not cramped, Amber said of the nursery. She also dreamed of the time when Amanda would finally grow up and move away, either to study in another city or get married. I don't think we'll be able to get a bigger apartment, Amber reasoned. Times are hard, but Amanda's already a bride, and when she leaves, the place will be free, and the boys will have more room. And so will we. These dreams of her stepmother, spoken aloud, made the girl feel even more unnecessary and unloved. And the father? He did not even object to his wife, as if he too thought that Amanda's presence alone prevented everyone from living. Amanda finished 9 grades and entered a school to become a pastry chef. She wanted to become independent sooner, to get a job, rent an apartment, and move away from her family, who considered her a burden. Amanda had a group of wonderful girls. She immediately made friends with Lucy, a small, cheerful, carefree, and completely good-natured girl. It was easy and pleasant to communicate with her. Once Amanda had a person with whom she could share her worries. Emily pitied her friend, scolded her stepmother, and very often invited Amanda to her house. Emily lived in a spacious apartment with her grandmother. The girl had never seen her father, and her mother was building a personal life somewhere on the side. In some ways, the fates of girlfriends were similar. Both of them did not know parental love. But Emily was luckier. She had a caring grandmother who did not care about her granddaughter. At the beginning of summer was Emily's birthday, her coming of age, and the girl decided to celebrate not anywhere, but in a nightclub. I've never been to such a place before. Emily's eyes were burning with impatience. I'm 18, and I've never been to a club before. Neither have I, Amanda admitted. This is ridiculous. We need to fix this right now. And so the girls found themselves in a nightclub. All that music, the ear-splitting bass, the crowd of young people on the dance floor. The girls were a little confused at first. "I wanted to go home right away," Amanda admitted, but Emily held her back. "Wait, we haven't understood anything yet. What if we like it?" Emily firmly dragged her friend to a vacant table. "I think they ordered a pizza and a Coke. They didn't get drinks." "Not you, or I have never had a drink before," Amanda said reasonably. "I don't know what it'll do to us." "And we're all alone here," Emily agreed. The girls went to the dance floor. The cheerful Emily blended right in with the crowd. She caught the rhythm and began to dance naturally and harmoniously. But Amanda felt constrained and awkward, tried to make some movements with her hands and feet, but seemed ridiculous to herself. It was good that it was dark, noisy and crowded. Hardly anyone paid attention to her. But Amanda was wrong. In fact, James was already following her. Only the girl didn't even realize it at the time. He was attracted by Amanda's differentness from the others. The girls from the club are all the same. Nothing new, nothing interesting. I've already looked at all of them. And then suddenly this modest and beautiful, incredibly slender, long-legged, a natural beauty. But how could I pass her up? James approached Amanda's table when she was alone. Emily was on the dance floor, oblivious to the world and looking very happy. Amanda, on the other hand, was still kind of uncomfortable, awkward, uncomfortable, but she didn't want to ruin her friend's party. Let her have fun. Birthday girl. Amanda sat at the table, looking at the people dancing. It was interesting to look at the outfits and hairstyles of the girls, the faces of the guys. There was a lot of people here, both green school children and people of almost parental age. "Excuse me, can I sit down?" Amanda heard. She shifted her gaze to the person speaking. It was a handsome guy in a tight black t-shirt, emphasizing the relief of muscles and obviously not cheap jeans. The young man was looking directly at Amanda and smiling openly. "Do you mind if I sit down?" The stranger repeated his question. "No, of course not," Amanda said. "Good." The guy smiled even wider and sat down directly opposite Emily's seat. "My name is James. I've been watching you for a long time. I thought I'd introduce myself." Amanda was embarrassed. She had no experience with the opposite sex. At school, boys didn't pay much attention to Amanda. They chose more colorful and risky girls. And Amanda was always quiet, modest. She was afraid to say an extra word. And in college, they didn't have any guys in their group. And now a young man wants to meet her. He likes her. How is that possible? And the guy's handsome, confident, and apparently not poor. Amanda had no idea how to talk to him, although she really wanted to. But James acted like they'd known each other forever, talking about things, joking, complimenting Amanda. And soon the girl's shyness was gone. Amanda didn't notice how she got involved in the conversation. She laughed at the jokes of her charming interlocutor, answered his questions, listened to stories from James's cheerful student life. The guy studied at the best university in the city at a prestigious law school. He was also involved in sports. He was a member of the university volleyball team. Lived with his parents in an apartment in the city center. He worked part-time at a pizzeria as a cook's assistant and drove his own car. Amanda stared into his cheerful eyes of an amazing emerald hue and felt like she was falling in love, for the first time in her life. A racing heartbeat, lightheadedness, a desire to be as close to him as possible. Weren't those the signs of falling in love? James was drawn to Amanda too. The girl could feel it and see it in his interested gaze. The guy was showering her with compliments. Amanda couldn't believe her happiness. And she was desperately afraid to disappoint her new acquaintance, to say something wrong or do something. In fact, she was terrified of pushing James away. "Oh, it's your friend." It wasn't Emily who came back to the table. It was Amanda. She'd already forgotten that she'd come to the nightclub with a friend. It seemed that the perceptive Emily understood everything from her friend's eyes. James, the guy, introduced himself and immediately stood up, giving way to the girl. Wow, what a gallant, a real gentleman. Emily marveled. "I'm actually on my way out." She looked at Amanda questioningly. She understood her friend's look. Emily wondered if she was the third extra, asking if it was time for her to leave. Amanda didn't know what to say to her friend. On the one hand, she didn't want to leave James. To be here alone with him, what could be more wonderful? On the other hand, it wasn't an easy decision to make, because, well, it was just scary. Honestly, this was the first time Amanda was seeing this man. What would James think of her if she agreed to be alone with a guy she didn't even know? And James understood the girl's hesitation. Amazing sensitivity. "I could drive you both home," he offered. "Only on the condition that Amanda leave me her phone number." The girl smiled. He would drive them both. That's a whole different matter. And James also asks for her phone number. But of course she will gladly give him those numbers. James' car was parked in the wide parking lot in front of the club. A black Chevrolet Cruze, not an expensive foreign car, but quite a nice car for a young guy. Amanda rejoiced. Lucky James wasn't rich. The guy drove the girls to Emily's house. Tonight Amanda had a sleepover at her friend's house. The parents had been warned about it in advance. Emily went out first. For a moment Amanda and James were left alone in the cabin. The guy took advantage of this and took Amanda's palm in his hand and brought it to his lips. It was a very gallant kiss that filled Amanda's heart with light and warmth. "I'll be sure to call you tomorrow," James said. Amanda will be waiting for him to leave. Emily pounced on her friend with questions. She was curious to know how Amanda had gotten her hands on the handsome man. "I don't know," Amanda shrugged. "He picked me somehow." "Lucky you," Emily sighed. "I was making eyes at a guy on the dance floor, but he didn't even pay attention to me." "You'll get there," Amanda smiled. And then she added, "I'm just afraid he won't call me back." "He will," she said confidently. "The way he was looking at you. If someone looked at me like that, I'd be so happy." Emily was right. James did call back the next morning and invited Amanda to the movies. It was the opening night of another big superhero blockbuster. And there, in the darkness of the auditorium, James kissed Amanda for the first time. The girl even felt dizzy. She didn't know how to behave in such a situation. It was her first kiss. James seemed to realize that. "What about you? Were you seeing anyone else before me?" he asked, pulling back slightly and looking into Amanda's eyes. "No," she said, embarrassed. "Well, that's it." Now James would realize how ridiculous and worthless she was. She was almost 18, and she hadn't even been on a real date yet. There must be something wrong with her. Who would want her like that? But to Amanda's surprise, the negative answer pleased James. His eyes shone with joy. A wide smile lit up his face. He suddenly put his arms around Amanda gently and pulled her close to him. The girl felt his heart beating and melted with happiness. Some events were unfolding on the screen, but the meaning of the movie kept slipping away from Amanda. He was there. James put his arm around her shoulders, stroked her hair from time to time, and sometimes he looked at her silently and smiled at her. They often met, went to cafes and movies, went on rides, just wandered around the picturesque streets and neighborhoods. Sometimes James would take Amanda out of town. He knew so much about so many things. Young people then went to the waterfalls, then to the mountain with flowering plants. It turns out that in the vicinity of his hometown, a lot of interesting and beautiful. And Amanda had no idea. "You have a boyfriend now." "And I'm still alone," Emily envied her friend a little. "You'll have a boyfriend, too," Amanda replied. "Maybe, but when? You have a boyfriend now, and I'm still alone, with no one to go out with." So Amanda was a little embarrassed to tell her friend about her meetings with James, each of which turned into a magical adventure. Why would she want to hurt Emily's feelings? Happiness loves silence. Amanda didn't know where she'd first heard that beautiful expression, but she thought they were very wise words. Amanda finally felt loved. It turned out to be an incredibly pleasant feeling. James took care of her, opening the car door in front of her, giving her something to eat all the time. And if it got chilly, he took off his jacket and threw it over Amanda's shoulders. He was so sensitive, so attentive. James seemed to pick up on any change in the girl's mood and anticipate her desires. Love, support, attention. Amanda lacked it in her family. And here comes a guy who enveloped her with warmth, like a cotton blanket. Of course, James quickly became for her the most native and close person. Sometimes at night in bed, Amanda couldn't sleep and thought about how she had lived without James. Too bad James was a very busy young man. School, work, and his grandmother in the village, to whom he often traveled with groceries. The guy couldn't spend as much time with Amanda as she would have liked. By the way, he often regretted it out loud. "Baby, I want to hold you in my arms and hold you 24 hours a day. You are so amazing, but I have so much to do, my head is spinning sometimes. Amanda, lying in James's arms, understood. She felt sorry for the guy. He must be very tired, running around like a squirrel in a wheel. But he seemed to like the active life. That's good, too. Her father and stepmother didn't notice the change in Amanda's behavior. They did not see the happy glint in her eyes and thought that the girl spent a lot of time with her friend. One day, during a safety lecture, Amanda suddenly felt sick. It was early morning, the first class. The girl was groggy from the morning. But then the teacher suddenly spoke about the smell of raw fish, and Amanda felt it. Her eyes even darkened. No, she rushed for the exit. She had to make it. And Amanda did. How could she vomit? She'd never been like this before. What's wrong with you? Lucy came to ask. You look so pale. I was sent to see if you were all right. I think I'm fine, Amanda smiled. She suddenly felt strangely weak. Even her knees trembled. Are you pregnant by any chance? Emily asked. No, I'm not. Amanda shook her head negatively and suddenly thought about it. It was entirely possible. It was unlikely, of course, but not impossible. Her stomach suddenly felt cold. Cold from the sudden realization. Emily said confidently. No, Amanda admitted. Then take the test. I don't know why not. I'm afraid, Amanda admitted honestly. On the way home, she stopped by the drugstore and bought a test. Something inside her told her that the result would be positive. Amanda had almost no doubts about it, and she was right. The test showed 2 bright stripes. It was a good thing no one was home at that time. Her brothers at school, her parents at work. Amanda shakily made her way to her couch and collapsed on it. Tears rolled from her eyes. The girl could not understand her own feelings. On the one hand, her heart was overflowing with joy and tenderness. She had a baby under her heart, a very real baby. Her baby, hers and James's. What a beautiful and wonderful creature it must be. On the other hand, Amanda didn't feel ready for motherhood. She wasn't even 18 yet. She wouldn't turn 18 until next month. No profession obtained, no job. What's she gonna do with a baby? She's not ready. But the baby has a father. James, on the other hand, is doing just fine. He's studying, working, even owns his own car. His parents have a big apartment. He's mentioned it many times. I'm sure there's plenty of room for everyone. So it would seem. All the conditions for the creation of a family are there. But how would James take this news? Amanda was very worried about that question. It seems that the guy sincerely loves her, gives gifts, tends to spend any free minute with her. There are not many of them in his busy life. There was only one way to test it. Amanda would always remember that evening. James had invited her for an evening stroll along the waterfront. Dusk had already fallen. The light of the lanterns gave the setting a special charm. James held Amanda's hand. They walked in silence along the parapet behind which the wide river carried its waters. Quiet, calm, majestic. There was a nice fresh breeze. The first stars appeared in the sky. I need to talk to you, Amanda decided that there was no point in waiting any longer. She had tried to tell James about their baby several times before, but she hadn't had the courage. Now he would finally find out, give her a hug, a smile, a little scolding for her indecision. And everything would be fine. About what? James was still smiling nonchalantly. He couldn't imagine what he would hear in a few seconds. James, I mean, we're having a baby, Amanda sucked in a breath. There was a heavy pause. Amanda stared into James's eyes, trying to figure out what he was feeling right now, and she didn't see any joyful emotions on the boy's face. Finally, he sighed heavily. Are you sure? Yes, Amanda nodded. Several tests have already come back positive. What's the timing of all this? The boy looked puzzled and upset. Seeing that look on his face, almost squeamish, was very painful for Amanda. The girl's eyes suddenly filled with tears. With a willful effort, she chased them back. What are you going to do? James looked at Amanda and waited for an answer. The girl shrugged her shoulders. She had hoped it would be James who would tell her what to do, reassure her and support her. But he seemed to be as confused and scared as she was. There was no trace of his usual confidence. Right before Amanda's eyes, he was transformed. The adult, all-powerful James, capable of solving any problem, disappeared. And in his place was a boy green, inexperienced, a coward. You're pathetic, even. Amazing metamorphosis, Amanda thought. So how do you plan to deal with it? James repeated his question. Amanda let go of her boyfriend's hand. He didn't want a serious relationship. This naive girl was already starting to bore him. At first, her enthusiasm, her ability to enjoy the little things had attracted and mesmerized James. Amanda looked at him with such eyes that he felt strong and omnipotent. It was an interesting experience. He'd never met a girl like her before, but gradually it bored him. James was once again drawn to bright, bold beauties. He planned to break up with Amanda gradually over the next 2 weeks, without scandals or hard feelings. And then she said it. I'm pregnant. James pulled away involuntarily, as if he wanted to run away. No, Amanda shook her head. We have to have an abortion. James seized on the thought. Money wasn't a problem. The term was short. It would be quick and easy. We'll go to the clinic tomorrow. I'm about to turn 18. Minors will tell their parents and they'll kill me, Amanda reminded him. If you don't, they'll kill you, James insisted. It's going to be noticeable soon anyway, Amanda shook her head. I have time to think of something, but we can't let anyone find out now. You're insane, James said. And sneaky. From a poor family? Maybe it's a way to make money. Amanda stared at him in amazement. How ugly he looked. Could she really fall in love with someone like that? It's not going to work, he said. My aunt works in the court. She will make the documents. And you won't be able to prove that the child is mine. Maybe it's not mine at all. Amanda sighed heavily, turned around and walked away. Away from James and his hurtful, nasty words. The voice of the man she had recently loved with all her soul came through. Get out of here so I don't have to see you. I'll never recognize him, do you hear me? You can't prove anything. If you try, I'll crush you. Amanda didn't doubt that James had the strength to crush her. But she wasn't going to fight him, and she didn't even want to see him now. The prince had turned out to be a coward and a scoundrel. Amanda was almost running down the embankment. The blood was pounding in her temples. An unpleasant chill spread through her body. At some point, she noticed the wary glances of passers-by and realized that her face was wet with tears. She felt an unbearable pain in her solar plexus. For a moment, she stopped thinking about the baby. Her disappointment had overshadowed her, and her soul was dark and disgusting. Had all of James's words, his reassurances, his tender glances and kisses been lies? That evening, Amanda walked about 10 kilometers home, not even noticing the distance. She tried to concentrate on her steps, seemingly counting them to distract herself from her heavy thoughts. In front of the apartment door, Amanda wiped her tears and smoothed her hair. She had to look normal, so her stepmother and father wouldn't suspect anything. It wasn't hard. They usually paid little attention to her. The stepmother was in the kitchen. The father was humming in the bathroom. Michael and Tamati were playing a console in the living room. The room was vacant, wonderful. Amanda collapsed on the couch, turned her back to the wall, and instantly fell into a sound sleep. The morning is ancient in the evening. Tomorrow, surely she'd think of something. But Amber didn't think of tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, or the week after. Amanda went to school as usual. Summer vacation wasn't over yet, but students had to attend a special block of lectures before their last course. But what are we going to do, Emily, the only one who knew about Amanda's situation, often asked, unless you counted James, who had probably forgotten about the whole thing like a bad dream by now. I have no idea, the girl shrugged. I'll figure something out. Thither time went on and still no solution was found. The morning sickness had disappeared somewhere, and Amanda sometimes now even forgot that she was carrying a child under her heart. She felt nothing at all. Sometimes the thought even crept into her head, maybe the tests are all lies, but it can't be that a pregnant woman feels completely normal, can it? What about mood swings, strange taste preferences, rabid appetite? August came to an end, September flew by. And then one gloomy, chilly October morning, Amanda realized she couldn't button her favorite, and only neat jeans at the waist. Her stomach had grown, it seemed, overnight. Just like that, almost instantaneously. Amanda lifted up her shirt and scrutinized herself in the mirror. Yes, she definitely looked pregnant now. No matter how hard the girl tried, she couldn't get that belly in. Tears came to her eyes. Her head snapped up. Well, this is it. Now everyone will see. Everyone will realize what she's done, and why Amanda took so long to do anything about it. Why didn't she listen to James and go to the hospital in time? Honestly, she'd thought everything would sort itself out. Foolish and naive to believe such a thing. But the girl still hoped that the tests were wrong, or that the pregnancy would suddenly stop developing. Foolish, unsupported dreams. Now Amanda realized how carelessly she had behaved in a difficult situation, hid her head in the sand, like a stupid ostrich. The reason for that could have been those pregnancy hormones. And fear, of course. Fear of parents, of doctors, of the future. And now the falling belly reminded Amanda that the problem wasn't going anywhere, and she couldn't put it off any longer. Even if she continued to keep quiet, they would notice. The first, of course, would be the stepmother. She'll say to the father, "God, how can I live with myself?" That morning, Amanda walked to the school with her jeans unbuttoned. No one noticed. She wore a long, wide t-shirt on top. If only everything else was as easy to fix, she thought. And then there was Emily not being around. A friend was sick. She'd had heart problems since childhood. Suddenly, at the end of the summer, it had gotten worse. Emily was taken to the capital for surgery. The friend will be there for at least 2 or 3 months, if not longer. She even took a leave of absence from school. Amanda was worried about her friend. They talked every night, supporting each other. And yet the absence of the only understanding and kind-hearted person at such a moment was an additional challenge for Amanda. On that gray, overcast October day, Amanda returned from school in a gloomy mood. As always, she found on the refrigerator a list of things to do from her stepmother: wipe the floors, cook dinner, buy some groceries. But today the girl had no energy even for these household chores. On the morning of her first class, Amanda felt the baby inside her move. In the first moment, she experienced non-rational feelings: tenderness, joy, love. It seemed, in general, some kind of warmth for the baby that was growing inside her. And then a very different emotion came over her. Amanda finally realized that inside her was a living person with arms, legs, and heart, and maybe even with feelings. This is a huge responsibility, unbearable for Amanda. She can't even tell her parents about this person. Still hasn't made up her mind. What kind of mother is she for the rest of the day? The girl remained in gloomy silence. No one touched Amanda much. She saw no way out. Life seemed a burden. The people around her were cold, indifferent, evil. And in this world she wants to bring a child. What can such a mother give her? Nothing, not even basic protection. And now, sitting in an empty, quiet apartment, Amanda thought over the decision. A terrible, irrevocable, but, it seems, the only right one. The girl was overcome with doubts. Of course, it was not easy to take such a step. But the more she thought about her situation, the more she was convinced that she had to act. What's the point of staying here? She asked herself. My father doesn't need me, and my stepmother doesn't need me. She'd be glad to have a place for her own beloved children. Even James, who had once seemed so loving and caring, had betrayed her. How can anyone ever be trusted? Amanda is alone in this whole world, and no one will ever help her. Except Emily. But she needs support herself. Bad things happen to mostly good people, to people who don't deserve it. To keep herself from changing her mind, Amanda got up from her cozy couch and walked outside in what she was wearing. It was pouring rain. The homemade shorts and t-shirt were clearly not appropriate for the weather. Amanda could see goosebumps on her bare arms and legs, but somehow she didn't feel cold. The girl knew where she was going. There was only one place in their neighborhood suitable for Amanda's plan: a new building, a 16-story building. They say it has spacious apartments with high ceilings and big windows. Must be nice to live in a place like that. And here's Amanda standing outside this building, looking up. It's not hard to climb up the fire escape to the roof. And then, scary. But where do you go? Strangers were rushing past. Some glanced at Amanda with indifferent eyes. Others did not notice a teenage girl freezing in the October rain in summer shorts and a t-shirt. Everyone has their own business, everyone has their own worries. What to speak of strangers, if even her own father didn't care about Amanda? Child, are you all right? Amanda shuddered with surprise when she heard a dry and at the same time concerned voice. The girl turned around and met the gaze of worried light blue eyes. Before her stood an old woman in a long cloak. Small, thin, slightly hunched, pale. Thin strands of gray hair were poking out from under her gray shawl. What? Amanda didn't understand. She was far away from here now. Her heart clenched with fear. Her legs were stiff and she was shivering. What are you up to? As if the old woman had read the girl's thoughts. Come to my place. I'll warm you with tea, and you'll tell me everything. Amanda wanted to refuse, but the old woman spoke in a tone that did not tolerate objections, confident and at the same time kind and affectionate. She looked at Amanda with sympathy and curiosity. She cared. The stranger really wanted to know what misfortune had befallen this young girl. And it wasn't idle interest. Amanda felt that the old woman wanted to help her. Amazing. Amazing. Could this really happen? Amanda obediently followed the old woman. She was saying something as she walked and kept looking back, as if checking to see if the strange girl was following her. Only when she was in the old woman's small, clean apartment did Amanda realize that she was very cold. The warmth took her into its embrace, gave her a feeling of security and satisfaction. Amanda suddenly remembered what she had just wanted to do and shuddered. Now the thought seemed terribly wrong. Come into the kitchen, the old woman smiled and gestured to the table. What kind of tea do you like, black or green? Black with milk, please, if I may. Why not? The old woman put the kettle on the stove, took out dishes and simple food from the cupboard, store cookies, wafers, cheap candies, homemade jam. All of it was soothing to Amanda. She relaxed, felt pleasantly sleepy. It felt so good here. An island of calm and comfort in the middle of a gray, crazy world. Well, everything is ready, the old woman said. Amanda finally finished setting the table and sat down across from her guest. Now tell me what your trouble is. Lucy was embarrassed. She wanted to open up to this kind woman, but what would she think when she found out? Judgment, of course. Of that there was no doubt. Lucy was afraid to tell even her own family. And people of the older generation are even more categorical in such matters. Don't be embarrassed or afraid of anything, sighed the old woman. By the way, I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Pamela, and you're Amanda? That's a wonderful name. It's what I wanted to name my daughter. I've dreamed of having kids my whole life, but it never came true. I haven't dreamed yet, but I have, Amanda confessed to herself. Realizing that there was no retreat, she added, I'm expecting a baby. And I just turned 18. My boyfriend left me. And I can't tell my parents. That's all. Now the old lady will condemn her and throw her out on the street. Maybe she'll give her a lecture on morality first. And she'd be right, by the way. Amanda really is stupid and unscrupulous to be in this situation. But Pamela suddenly did something completely unexpected. She walked over to Amanda and hugged her tightly and very gently. And then Amanda couldn't take it anymore. All the worries and fears of the last few days began to come out of her with tears and sobs. The old woman soothingly stroked her back with her hard, dry palm and said something softly. Amanda couldn't make out all the words, but Pamela seemed to be telling her not to hold back and to cry as much as she needed to. When the tears dried up, Amanda, to her surprise, felt better. Strength and energy came from somewhere. Even breathing became easier. That's good. Pamela smiled at her, returning to her seat. Sometimes you need to cry. Now tell me more about it. We'll see what we can do to help you. Amanda smiled at the kind old woman. Was there really one person in the world who wanted to help her? It was true, she wasn't alone anymore. Amanda took a deep breath and told Pamela everything about her mother who had left so early, about her stepmother and father, and about James. Of course, he was especially hard to remember. Amanda also mentioned Amber, who was now in a hospital 100 kilometers away. Pamela listened without interrupting. Amanda could see in her face that the old woman was not judging her guest. She pities, sympathizes, worries, but definitely remains on the girl's side. Amanda felt Pamela's support and approval, and it gave her strength and confidence. That was it. Amanda finished her story. So why did you come here? To the high rise. Pamela frowned. Amanda lowered her eyes. Now she was afraid to admit what she had wanted to do only 40 minutes ago. But the old woman seemed to understand. You're just like me, she said suddenly, and shook her head. I was in the same situation too, and I didn't see any way out. I didn't want to live. So girl, don't think that you are alone. And don't blame yourself for anything. You fell in love? Lost your head? Who doesn't? Especially since you don't see affection and care at home. So your heart went out to this James. And he's a coward. What can you do? Amanda looked at Pamela in surprise. The old woman had managed to express so clearly in words what she felt. She'd only gotten involved with James because she'd been missing his affection, care, and attention for a long time, ever since her mother had passed away. It seemed to Amanda that now, finally, she wasn't alone. She had James. She wanted it so badly that she probably didn't pay attention to the alarm bells. Were there any? Of course there were. I've been in the same situation myself, Pamela sighed. Had you? Amanda had forgotten her own distress for a moment. Would you tell me? Pamela grinned. It was a difficult story for her. But the girls sitting in front of her now, it was important to hear it. Perhaps fate itself had brought them together. It was no coincidence that Amanda had gotten in Pamela's way at the right and crucial moment. No. The old woman was sure that the girl would not have committed this terrible act. Most likely she would have come to her senses on the way to the roof or standing on the edge. Pamela saw in Amanda's eyes that she wanted to live and had even managed to love her baby. Yes, the girl was in a difficult position, but it would all pass. And fears and pain will not be easy. And yet there are many good things ahead for Amanda. The girl will realize this once she calms down a little. Pamela's story should help Amanda calm down, at least for a confused girl. It will be interesting to hear the story of someone who has had to experience the same thing she herself has. Pamela had it harder, I think. Times were different. A lot more was required of girls then than it is now. Tell me, Amanda asked, looking at Pamela curiously. It won't take long. Do you have time? I do now. Amanda made herself comfortable in her chair and prepared to listen. Pamela was born in a small town to a large family. Her father and mother worked on the collective farm. Every morning they had to go to another town. Both of them returned late. Accordingly, the household and the younger children were in the care of the eldest daughter. The nimble and agile Pamela coped with everything playfully. She returned from school, quickly did her homework and began to do things to clean the floors, cook lunch and dinner, wash and hang the laundry. Work burned in young Pamela's hands. She even had time to go for a walk with her girlfriends before picking up the younger ones from daycare. Then you can't get away from the little ones. For such children need an eye, and an eye this Pamela learned very well. By her 15th birthday, the girl dreamed of being a teacher. Most of all, she liked math and physics. These were the subjects she wanted to teach children when she grew up. Teachers praised the clever student and predicted a great future for her. And so it turned out in the end. But at what cost? It happened so that in a neighboring town died sister of Pamela's father. A very young woman's heart failed. The head of the family died at the front a few years ago, so that the children were left round orphans. There were 4 of them. Neighborhood children decided to distribute among relatives, and the eldest daughter, 15-year-old Emma, was given to Pamela's family. Emma seemed to be the same age as Pamela. But friendship between the girls did not work. 2 different characters. Cheerful, quick-witted Pamela and slow, thoughtful Emma seemed somehow different, and they had nothing to talk about. Emma, unlike her cousin, was not very eager to study. But she was a wonderful hostess who could cook complicated dishes and cleaned so well that everything sparkled. Emma had no patience for clutter, and she put things in their proper places. It was like it was in her blood. To herself, Emma didn't seem overly affluent, carefree, unserious. And she was always making remarks to her sister she dusted the wrong way, washed the dishes too long, and kneaded the dough the wrong way. This irritated Pamela, which of course did not contribute to the strengthening of relations between the sisters. Parents also added oil to the fire. They constantly set Emma as an example to their eldest daughter. Look how clever Emma is, praised her niece mother. Such a wife to anyone for happiness. And what about me? Pamela was indignant. I do my chores too, and look after the children and clean. I've managed without her before. How am I any worse? You laugh too loudly and answer too much, said the father. How it annoyed young Pamela. But there was a great advantage to Emma's arrival. Now the girls shared the household chores equally, and Pamela had more free time to go out with her friends. Emma had no desire to go out. She hadn't made friends with anyone from the neighborhood. So the girl quietly let her cousin Emma go out in the evenings and looked after the little ones. Okay, go, Emma sighed every time I left her, she grumbled. Sisters just for show. In fact, she was even glad to stay, at least for a while, as mistress of the house. Oh, those evenings young Pamela needed them. Evenings were the best time. Pamela still recalled with nostalgia her walks through Nashville in the company of teenagers like herself. The things they did. They played like kids, slid down snowy mountains, played soccer, jumped over the fire, and swam in the river after sunset, despite their parents' prohibitions. It was fun and good fun. Adults watched the fun of boys and girls with a smile. Probably they remembered the time when they were like that themselves. Sometimes one of the men even joined the noisy company, which caused laughter and approval of teenagers. One of those men was sometimes Ben. He had not lived in Nashville for a long time, but he often visited his parents who remained here. Ben himself at one time went to study in the city and stayed there, as happened to many. It was said that Ben worked at a big factory and had already reached the position of a shop manager. He had his own apartment and a brand new red car. But he didn't get married. This fact bothered the locals a lot. Women tried to match the enviable groom with their daughters and nieces. Ben's mother lamented and dreamed aloud of grandchildren. Only Ben himself was in no hurry to marry. In his own words, he was doing quite well as it was. Ben at that moment was already about 30 years old. A grown man, almost old by the standards of 15-year-old Pamela. But he was nothing like the people of that age the girl knew. First, Ben dressed fashionably and stylishly. Secondly, he joked a lot, laughed, and generally behaved relaxed and carefree. Here and with teenagers did not bother to race the ball. Many girls from the company were in love with him. Some of them talked about it directly, and some of them didn't even need to admit it. Everything became noticeable by the looks they threw at Ben. Ben liked talking to young people. That evening, the man spent the late afternoon playing ball with the teenagers. Pamela, daydreaming as always, secretly admired his deft, precise movements. Ben sometimes caught her eye, and then the girl shamefully lowered her eyes. How handsome he was, and so different from the natives. Like a man from another world. But why? How was he from another world, the city? It's a different life there. Yes, Pamela had been to the city several times. The smart, wide streets, the motley crowd of people rushing somewhere. Squares, fountains, beautiful parks. This splendor even made the girl dizzy. Life in the city was like a never-ending holiday. Ben touched Pamela a few times that evening accidentally during the game. It was as if a lightning bolt struck her at those moments. He didn't seem to notice. When it got dark, the teens went to a bench outside the neighborhood. It was their favorite gathering place. One of the boys would make a fire because it was dark here at this time. So they sat some on a bench, some on fallen trees, and some just on the grass. They told each other scary stories, discussed the events of the day, and dreamed. The atmosphere was pleasant and light. Yes, Pamela loved those hours. Then we slowly went home. Pamela was one of the first to leave. In her family, there was a strict rule to show up before midnight, even if tomorrow was a day off, and she didn't have to go to school. The girl could not disobey her parents. If she tried to do that, her mother and father would not let her out at all next time. They were strict. That night, Ben stayed with the boys. It wasn't surprising. It happened sometimes. The teenagers liked to hear him talk about his childhood. It's time to go, Pamela sighed, glancing at her wristwatch, a gift from her father. It was almost 12 o'clock at night. The friends sympathized and went back to their leisurely conversation. It was good for them to stay together around the fire, happy and carefree. Pamela didn't want to go home at all, but there was nothing to do. She walked through the deserted, dark streets of the village. It was quiet, very quiet. Only from the bench, now quite far away, the wind sometimes brought scraps of phrases and laughter. Large bright stars shone in the sky. The path was illuminated by the diffused light of the pale moon. Suddenly, Pamela heard light footsteps. Someone was catching up with her. The girl stopped and looked back. Ben was approaching her at a light trot. He was smiling at her and following her with purpose. Pamela's heart sank into her heels and her ears rattled. When she realized it, she still couldn't believe it. Now Ben will come up to me, and it will appear that there is some quite domestic reason why he is now hurrying after the young neighbor, thought the girl. You're fast, Ben said, either delighted or surprised as he approached Pamela. She lowered her eyes to the floor, embarrassed. It was a good thing it was dark outside and Ben couldn't see her flush. Otherwise, he'd have realized at once that Pamela was one of his many admirers. "Are you going home already?" the man asked. Pamela nodded affirmatively, still looking at the toes of her dusty sandals. Ben's proximity made her heart race, and she felt dizzy. They'd never been alone like this before, and there was no one else around. Her parents are waiting. "My father scolds me if I'm home after 12, but he doesn't beat me," she said. Ben looked at Pamela with interest. "No, but he swears." "I see. My parents were strict too." "Well, you'll grow up soon and you'll be your own boss. How old are you?" "Already 16. "Almost," Pamela answered. "Wow. Already a bride. I remember you as a little girl. And now you're so beautiful." Ben scrutinized the girl very closely, as if groping her. He liked what he saw. Pamela was both pleased and a little afraid. "You are really very beautiful," said the man. Pamela flashed to the roots of her hair and smiled. These words created some kind of magic. The girl really felt strong, mature, and incredibly beautiful. She squared her shoulders and finally dared to look into Ben's eyes. In them, Pamela saw sincere admiration and also interest. Ben was openly admiring her. A wave of unexplored sensations came over the girl, and she wanted him to touch her. Ben, as if guessing her thoughts, covered her shoulder with his palm. Pamela felt a wave of goosebumps run up her spine. "Shall we walk to the river?" Ben said hoarsely, keeping his gaze fixed on the girl. Under that gaze, Pamela felt like a queen, a goddess, the most beautiful woman on earth. She would have followed Ben to the ends of the earth for that feeling. Never mind that her father would give her a beating for being late. It's okay, he'll find something to complain about. She'd tell her parents later that she'd been sitting around the campfire with the boys and had forgotten the time. When Ben repeated his question about the walk to the river, Pamela smiled and nodded affirmatively. "That's a good girl," said the man. His affirmative answer made him the happiest man in the universe. It turned out to be very pleasant to feel your power over a man, especially a man like Ben. He took the girl's hand gently and led her toward Poplar Street. Just beyond it began the hillside on which the village was situated, and at the foot of it flowed the quiet river Fedor. In the summer, Pamela used to splash in it almost every day with her friends. But that had been in the daytime. Now it was night. The moon shone in the sky, in the light of which everything seemed so unfamiliar, so magical and mysterious. Ben and Pamela sat down on a fallen tree that served as a local shop. "You're a ravishingly beautiful girl." Ben looked at his companion without looking away. Pamela was not like the other girls. Her misdemeanors were different from the silly pranks of her friends. This Ben had realized not so long ago, and had lost his peace ever since. His words made a great impression on Pamela. She had always known she was different from her girlfriends, always felt special. And now Ben had confirmed her hunch. But was it right to sit alone with a grown man at night by the river and listen to his compliments? "Your eyes, your hair, your smile. You're perfect. I've never met anyone like you before," Ben said. "Really, I'm embarrassed," Pamela finally admitted. "I don't know what to say." And then Ben kissed her. It was so sudden that she didn't even have time to pull away. And then she didn't want to. "I'm sorry I couldn't help myself," Ben said, looking at Pamela carefully. She smiled and kissed Ben herself. She decided to let it be. She would think about whether she was doing the right thing later. For now, the girl just wanted to enjoy this magical and absolutely fantastic moment. Ben is near. He likes him. And he doesn't just like him. This grown-up, handsome man is the dream of everyone in their town, down to 10-year-old girls. He chose her. It all happened right on the beach. Pamela didn't realize it at first, and then it was too late to leave, and she didn't want to. To be honest, it hurt a little. It was good that it was over quickly. The girl hoped she had behaved properly. Ben smiled, stroked her hair, took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked. "Would you like one?" He offered one to Pamela. She shook her head negatively. Now she felt stupid and constrained. What to say, how to behave. Ben had better take the initiative again. "Are you all right? Are you okay?" he finally asked. Pamela nodded. All sorts of thoughts were running through her mind. It appeared that Ben's feelings for her were very serious. He would probably take her back to the city with him now. They would live in his apartment. It's going to take some getting used to. It probably won't be easy, but Ben will help her. He's such a strong, confident adult. You can't be afraid of anything. Pamela will be like a stone wall behind him. The main thing is that Ben loves her. He won't be as indifferent and irritable as her parents, but will surround her with love and care. The way he was looking at her. Don't tell anyone. Ben squeezed himself out. It was like an ice-cold gush of water. The voice of the man who just half an hour ago had been staring at her with admiring eyes now sounded cold and indifferent. "I won't," Pamela replied. "That's right. And even if you did, no one would believe you." "Why not?" Pamela wondered what had happened to make Ben change so suddenly. Maybe she'd done something wrong. But the man understood the question in his own way. "Do you want to know why no one will believe you?" He grinned. "Well, think about it. Everyone in town knows that all the local girls are in love with me. And not just girls, but older ladies too. There's a lot of rumors about me around here. The ladies make up stories, one more interesting than the other. But no one believes them for a long time." Pamela nodded. Ben was right. Even if she told what had happened, no one would believe her. They'd think she was just another lovesick fool dreaming about him, sharing her fantasies. So it's best to keep quiet or they'll laugh. Why? She did ask a question. Why, of all the girls in their company, had Ben gone after her? He must have had feelings for her. She wanted to hear again that she was special. No reason. Ben smiled. You just happened to fall into his lap. He patted Pamela on the shoulder and walked up the slope. The man climbed easily and very quickly. Pamela sat on the bank for a while, thinking about what had happened. Tears ran down her cheeks. She had already believed that happiness was near. She had even begun to think of herself as an incredible beauty. To think that in her mind Pamela had already moved to the city, to Ben's apartment. You've got to be such a fool. She wasn't special, and if she was, it was in a bad way. I don't think any of her friends could have gotten into such a mess. And Pamela? She's hanging her ears, feeling like her favorite fool. But there was no turning back the clock, and the girl made a decision that seemed to her at that moment the only right one. She forgot about what had happened, hid the events of that evening in the hidden corners of her memory. There was nothing, that's all. At home, the girl got it from her father. She patiently listened to her parents moralizing. She was not even shaken by another comparison with Emma, who had long since slept in her bed. Why take offense at the truth? Her father was right, that's just the way it was. Since then, she hadn't been drawn to the outdoors anymore. No, she hadn't become despondent or fearful. She just didn't want to go to her friends because she might meet Ben, and she didn't want that at all. It was too painful, too hard, and Pamela would feel dirty and stupid around him. After all, he knew her secret, he did, and now he saw her through completely different eyes. The parents did not notice any change in their eldest daughter. They were too busy with work, household chores, fiddling with the kids. But Emma, sensitive Emma, immediately suspected something. One day the cousin couldn't bear to ask her directly. What happened that night? I can tell something's wrong. Your face is gone. Did you have a fight with your friends? Golden untruths were spilled. You guys fight all the time, but you make up all the time. This is different. You haven't set foot outside in 2 weeks. And before that, you couldn't stay indoors for a day. So Pamela went off the deep end and told Emma everything. Even though they were not friends, but the cousin will not betray and will not run to tell everyone about what she found out. Emma was reliable and serious, though she was a bore, of course. Pamela wanted to share her misfortune with someone. Telling her sister made her feel better. The relief was instantaneous, but now Emma was frowning and thinking hard. You do realize it's a crime, she said at last. What? But what he did. He belongs in prison. You're a minor, a child, and he's a grown man who took advantage of your inexperience. Pamela didn't see her story that way. And it's not your fault, Emma continued. You're just a teenager. It's his fault. That's why he told you to keep quiet. Pamela nodded. Emma was right. Then, sitting on the riverbank, she blamed herself. She'd thought herself stupid, naive, dirty, promiscuous. But the real culprit was Ben. The realization of this simple truth made her feel better. And Pamela did something she'd never thought she'd do before she hugged Emma tightly. Thank you, she said to her sister. It was the first time she'd ever felt warm feelings for an unloved relative. She was so smart, Emma, and sensitive. "Are we going to tell our parents?" Emma asked. "No, not at all." Pamela objected. "I want to forget the whole thing as soon as possible." "You realize that even though it was his fault, it would still be a shame for me if people found out." Emma nodded understandingly. Of course, she knew what her sister was worried about. Reputation is a very fragile and important thing, especially if you live in a small town. "Okay, let's just forget about it." Emma nodded. But forgetting it didn't work. 3 months later, Pamela was horrified to realize she was expecting a baby. It was October. Vacation was long over. Ben had left town even earlier. After he left, Pamela breathed a sigh of relief. Still, the proximity of this man was very tense, even though he tried to stay away from her. But Pamela remembered perfectly well how her pregnant mother had walked. And of course, in her 15 years, she knew the main signs. She had them all at once. Nausea, increased appetite, a tugging sensation in her abdomen, and most importantly, a delay. She hadn't noticed it at first. It had happened to her before. But soon it became impossible to ignore the troubling symptoms. She couldn't even tell Emma about it, but she couldn't hide the shame of it either. What to do? What to do? It's a disgrace. They'll start looking for the culprit. No one will believe that Ben is the baby's father. It's useless to even say anything. This man has an impeccable reputation. He's the standard bearer for the locals. And Ben's right. A lot of the girls in town have a crush on him, and they make up stories about him from time to time, that he gave them a special look, or a hug, or a kiss. Or maybe it's all stories. But nobody believes the girls. So they'll definitely look for the culprit. And they'll probably assign it to some boy who can't justify himself. Andrew, most likely. Andrew lives near Pamela. They're kind of friends. They cheat off each other's homework. The kid sometimes carries heavy buckets home for the girl. The kids even tease them about being bride and groom over the summer. Andrew's the one who's going to get suspicious. Poor fellow, he'll have a hard time, all because of her. The mother will weep and quietly hate the daughter who brought such shame on the family. The father will probably even benefit, won't he? I don't think so. He is holding on, sometimes, and for smaller misdemeanors handed out to children slaps and often recalled those times when young people birching, considering such methods undeservedly forgotten methods of education. Life became a nightmare. Pamela would become an outcast. Other girls will be forbidden by their families to even go near her. And the child, what will happen to him? The world will be hostile to him long before he's born. And then it'll get worse. Pamela can't handle it, definitely can't handle it. This life. What's it for? At night, when everyone was fast asleep, Pamela cried quietly into her pillow so as not to wake anyone. Surprisingly, the tears brought relief. Temporary, though. The girl desperately tried to find a way out to hide the pregnancy, and then quietly give birth somewhere and leave the baby in the forest. No, it's too complicated and scary. And could she leave a defenseless baby to die? It's not his fault. Try to terminate the pregnancy herself. It seemed like a lifesaver at first. Pamela carried heavy buckets and steamed for long periods in the bath she knew from her mother, who had been pregnant several times. When her daughter was already old enough, all of this was dangerous for women in childbirth. But her baby seemed to be strong. Nothing helped, the baby stayed inside. Moreover, it was actively growing, because Pamela already had a belly, still almost imperceptible, very neat. But that was just the beginning. Pamela was not herself. At school, did not listen to teachers, did not do her homework. The girl forgot about her dream of becoming a teacher. What kind of career plans can there be when there are such problems? And Pamela is not studying now. She will have a child in her arms. She would be a single mother in front of everyone. And so young. Emma tried to rouse her cousin. She thought she was worried about the story from the summer, but Emma had no idea it was more serious than that. And Pamela hadn't told her, but she couldn't say it out loud.
One night, lying in her narrow bunk, Pamela decided that it was all too hard for her, too unbearable, and she didn't want this life at all, because there would be nothing more good. Only tears of shame, sighs, poverty, general disapproval, reproaches, even beatings of parents. Is it worth clinging to such a life? And she suddenly thought of the Albany River, flowing at the foot of the hill on which the town settled.
It was on the bank of the river that the event that had divided her life into before and after had taken place. So it would end there, Pamela decided. She got out of bed, trying not to creak the springs, grabbed from the table the long silk ribbon that Emma used to weave into her thick braid in the mornings, and slipped out of the house in a light nightgown that reached almost to her ankles. It was already October, and her arms were immediately covered with goose flesh from the cold, but it would not be long before Pamela could feel nothing at all. She hurried toward the river, almost running, for she was afraid to change her mind. She stopped at the water's edge. She had to tie her hands with this ribbon, so that at the decisive moment she would not slacken and swim out. Pamela struggled, but managed to do it. Soon her hands were bound wrist to wrist. She could not swim out now. All that remained was to enter the river and take a few steps. The river was not wide, but it was deep enough. Children were not allowed here without their parents. A pale moon shone from the sky, about the same as then, a silent witness to Pamela's terrible secret. The girl stepped into the icy water. The river burned her feet with cold. But Pamela took another step, then another and another. And now the water was almost up to her chest. There was not much more to go. It was frightening to take those fateful steps. But Pamela had no way out. She realized it quite clearly. All she had to do was be brave enough to put all her problems behind her. I thought about that moment a lot afterward, Pamela said, resting her chin on her fist. Amanda stares at her with her eyes wide open. She realizes that the story ended well because Pamela is sitting across from her, but she still feels uneasy. I didn't see the way out. Then the old woman shook her head. Indeed, she didn't. It wasn't as bad as I had pictured in my head. But I realized it much later. If it hadn't been for a happy accident, I wouldn't have realized it at all. When Pamela was up to her neck in the icy water, she heard a desperate cry from behind her. Stop, don't. Then she heard a loud splash. Someone was rushing to her rescue. The girl froze. The situation seemed too unreal. Then she slowly turned around. It was Emma, wearing a nightgown as long as Pamela's but with her father's robe over it. Emma reached her sister in no time and dragged her toward the shore. Pamela resisted. Soon both girls were on the ground, drenched, freezing, shivering. Get home. Stern Emma commanded. You'll catch cold. Pamela nodded. Emma looked at her sister's bound wrists and sighed. Then she quickly untied the tape, took Pamela's hand, and the girls ran home. They quickly changed into dry clothes and dived into their beds, each in her own. But a moment later, Emma was under the covers with her sister. I knew something was wrong with you a long time ago, she whispered. I've been watching you. What are you up to? Why would you do something like that? You don't know anything, Pamela sighed. She was shivering, even though she was warm under the blanket. Perhaps it was fear that was beginning to realize what she had almost done. So tell me, Emma demanded. I won't tell anyone, Pamela said. Emma lay silent and obviously thinking about something. You fool, she said at last. Why didn't you consult me at once? Your problem is easily solved. And Emma told about a witch doctor from their native village, who had been curing women in their village and the surrounding villages of unwanted pregnancies all her life. And whoever went to her, even rumored to have come from the city. She helps young girls too, Emma continued to share information. She helps them for free, just because they have no other choice. And with the adults, Miss Hannah asks for money or groceries and she will help. Emma looked at her sister hopefully. Was there still more to come? Did Pamela really have a way out? Of course she does, Emma said confidently. Tomorrow, after school, I'll go to Miss Hannah's and make all the arrangements. And Emma was serious, reliable. She certainly didn't fail. The next day she had a plan ready. Emma had asked her parents to stay with her old friends in a neighboring town for the weekend and supposedly decided to spend time with her sister. In reality, the girls were going to stay at MS, Hannah's cabin, for 24 hours. The old woman was already waiting for the girls. She warned the sisters that it would take time for Pamela to recover from the procedure. That's why Emma had made up the story with her friends. Pamela was scared of a lot of things: pain, failure, exposure. And she was ashamed in front of this stranger, MS Hannah. Although Emma convinced her that she had seen all sorts of things in her life and treated everything with understanding, even pities young girls in trouble. That's why she helps them for free. MS. Hannah lived in a small house on the edge of town. A cozy, clean, bright house. Pamela even smiled when she saw it. She had imagined the witch's lair, quite differently, dark rooms with old-fashioned windows, bundles of dried herbs hanging everywhere, a skinny black cat with evil eyes. There was a cat, but it was ginger, fat, fluffy, indifferent. Miss Hannah received the girls cordially, gave them tea, asked Pamela about her trouble. She told Pamela everything without a secret, because she knew that this old woman would understand her and would not condemn her. MS. Hannah nodded silently, shook her head, and whispered something cursing to Ben under her breath. The procedure itself took place in a separate room. Pamela had to lie down on a special table, hard, long, cold. It was painful. Despite the fact that Miss Hannah had given the young patient some kind of potion beforehand, Pamela bravely endured. She tried not to show that she felt anything at all. But at one moment the pain became so unbearable that the girl lost consciousness, simply blacked out, fell into darkness. When she came to, she saw Miss Hannah and Emma leaning over her. She herself was already lying on the soft bed. Both had worried faces. "Well, thank goodness you're awake," Miss Hannah exhaled. "I thought it was over." "Is it over?" Pamela asked in a weak voice. She felt pain in every cell of her body, not as sharp as the pain on the table, but still. "Yes, it's all over, MS," Hannah replied. "The baby was clingy. I could barely manage it. I've never seen such a stubborn one. He almost took you with him. But you're young and strong. You did it." Pamela was frightened. She was afraid MS. Hannah would say it was all for nothing, that the pregnancy was still developing. "I don't know if you'll be able to be a mother now that you're older, MS," Hannah said. "I don't think so. The procedure was too hard, not without consequences. It happens." Pamela breathed out a sigh of relief. What did it matter what happened years from now? The main thing was that everything was fine now. She could finish school and go to college. All roads were open to her again. Pamela then felt happy and free. Many years had passed. Pamela, as she dreamed, became a teacher of physics and math. She finished school in this city, studied at the institute. The girl tried not to remember what happened to her then. But the story, of course, left an imprint on Pamela's behavior. She became more experienced, wiser, more cautious, and no longer allowed dangerous situations in her life, avoided guys. Pamela did not trust men, and even planned to live her whole life alone and independent. Other girls aspired to marry, dreamed of family life. Pamela was quite satisfied with a bachelor existence. Love did not pass her by. It happened when Pamela worked at school. Once in the gym needed repair. A construction crew arrived. It was led by a tall, russet-haired, blue-eyed guy. When Pamela first saw Adam, her heart gave a sweet shiver. She had forbidden herself to feel anything at first, but it was beyond her strength. All the more so when Adam began to pay the pretty young teacher some attention. This time everything was different, beautiful, romantic, and sincere. Adam asked Pamela out on dates and always greeted her with a bouquet of beautiful flowers. They sat in cafes, went to the movies and theaters, just walked around the city, talked a lot, got to know each other closer and closer, and closer. And at one fine moment, Pamela realized that she couldn't live without Adam. Happiness. He felt the same way. The young people got married. Pamela moved into her husband's apartment, which he got from work. The couple were happy. They lived soul to soul, but they couldn't have a baby. And I wanted one so badly, Pamela sighed. Of course I knew what was wrong. Hannah had warned me that there might be problems with children in the future. But at the time, having just gotten rid of the problem, it didn't bother me at all. A sad Pamela told her husband all about it. She didn't want there to be any secrets between them. Pamela was mentally prepared for Adam to leave her. Who would want someone like that? But he only hugged her tightly and told her it wasn't important. Adam took pity on me, Pamela continued. He, like Emma, blamed Ben for everything. So we'll have to live alone, without children. That's all right, that's what happens. And they lived, enjoying each other, traveling, working, meeting friends, visiting interesting places, reading, sharing impressions of what they had read, watching TV together, supported each other in everything. Adam and Pamela became the closest and dearest people. Wonderful, simply golden years, full of love, acceptance, and mutual understanding. For Pamela, they were a reward, payback for a cold and unhappy childhood. But time takes its toll. Pamela and Adam grew old. His heart problems have worsened since his retirement. And 2 years ago, Pamela was left alone. Adam had a heart attack right in front of his terrified wife. She took the loss hard and still hasn't fully recovered. It's only now that he's not around that I realize what loneliness is. Pamela shook her head. It's when there's no one to talk to, no one to care about. It's hard. Amanda nodded sympathetically. She temporarily forgot about her own problem. What kind of problem is it anyway? I'll tell my parents. They'll be grumpy, but they'll figure something out. There will be a way out. This is not the old days, when the family of a girl who got into such a situation lay in indelible shame. The XXI century is here, and this does not happen. Although, of course, it will not be easy. The apartment is small, and there's a new baby. Do you know what I was thinking? Pamela suddenly smiled. What if you came to my place and rented a room from me? Not for money, but for domestic help. I'm old, weak. Sometimes it's hard even to go to the store, and here I have a living soul near me. I don't know. Amanda laughed, realizing at once that it was an ideal option. But it's not profitable for you. The room could be rented out for a lot of money. I don't have that kind of money, and all you're offering to do is help you with the household chores. It's an unequal exchange. Take it. Pamela smiled warmly. And you feel good, and I'm not so lonely. And when the baby is born, I'll help you with the baby. I'd love to. I've never had children of my own. So I just love babies, Pamela continued. How many relatives have you swaddled? It's exhausting. And you're going to need some help, too. Amanda still couldn't believe her good fortune. It was the perfect solution to the problem. A real solution. The old woman is really lonely, and Amanda needs support and participation. They would save each other. Thank you. Tears came to her eyes. The future is finally becoming clearer. Bright rainbow colors. And faith. For the first time, I felt the joy of being a mom soon. I now have a plan. I have support, which means everything will be okay.